Did you know? Up until about halfway in development, Majora's Mask was planned to have an adult mask. The Hyrule Historia shows some concept art of adult Link, with a note saying, "Only child Link appears in Majora's Mask," but for some reason, there are illustrations for adult Link. The folks who wrote the Hyrule Historia didn't know why that art was in there, but we managed to figure it out by translating some old Japanese magazines ourselves. According to co-director Yoshiaki Koizumi, an adult mask was originally planned as a bonus feature. He said, "Until halfway into development, there was a mask that let you turn into adult Link. In this game, Link can transform into different races, so adult Link would have just been a bonus feature. But art director Imamura pointed out that just turning into an adult wasn't very interesting, and it didn't make Link stronger or anything, so we decided not to include adult Link this time." The Hyrule Historia theorized that maybe these sketches were prototypes for Fierce Deity Link, but in that same magazine, the developers say no, the adult mask was completely separate. The actual origins of the Fierce Deity mask was that at one point they made a mask that turned Link into a gigantic fierce deity, but it was so overpowered it totally broke the game, so they split its abilities in half and made two masks out of it, the Giant's Mask and the Fierce Deity Mask. In the final game, you can only use the Fierce Deity against bosses, and the Giant's Mask is only usable in one room, Twin Mold's boss chamber. They're two of the coolest masks in the game, but these restrictions mean you only get to wear them a few minutes during an entire playthrough. But it wasn't always supposed to be that way. During development, the other co-director, Eiji Aonuma, said it was only proper that they can be worn anywhere, just like all the other masks, but that was going to take some time they unfortunately didn't have. There were some complications, like that the doors in Clocktown are big enough for adult Link to pass through, but the Fierce Deity's too tall, so they would have had to make special animations to make him duck down. Shigeru Miyamoto only gave them 1 year to make the game, and the release date was coming up soon, so they just didn't have the time to make it happen. You can still screw around with both masks in Clocktown using cheats, but it's super glitchy because, they didn't have the time to make it work right. These developer stories were printed in the Japanese magazine Nintendo Dream. More specifically, the extra mini magazines included with the July, August, and September 2000 issues. There's about a dozen pages of developer secrets, behind-the-scenes stories, and answers to fan theories inside. Insider details that the writers of the Hyrule Historia didn't even know. So we had them all translated, and that's where most of the information in today's video is going to come from. In one issue, programmer Kenzo Hayakawa says, "Actually, the position of most of the stars is determined by the player's name. When night falls, look for your own unique constellation." I guess you could say every playthrough of Majora's Mask is personalized, depending on what name you choose when the game begins. To test it out, we made two save files, one where we named ourselves Link, and another named Zelda. Then, in each one, we stood in the same spot and stared at the same patch of sky. As you can see, Link's sky has about twice as many stars as Zelda's. Nintendo Dream's readers knew this little secret since the game came out, but it wasn't known in the West until 2021, when a modder named Zell discovered it in the game's code. Something else most Westerners don't know is that the Great Bay's giant turtle is based on Kinsan Ginsan, a pair of Japanese twins famous for living well past 100, making them the oldest twins in the world. Kinsan died while Majora's Mask was in development, so the designer used her face as inspiration for the ancient turtle. We think that might be why Link gives a long wave goodbye to the turtle at the temple. The designer didn't say that, but it's what it looks like to us, saying goodbye to the famous Kinsan who lived to 107. Her sister Ginsan died a few months after Majora's Mask released. May they rest in peace. In another issue, Miyamoto says he wanted to add a fishing minigame, but not just improving on the fishing in Ocarina of Time, because that might end up too similar to Mother creator Shigesato Itoi's bass fishing game. He said, "Rather than improving on the fishing from the last game, I want to do something new, like Jabu Jabu fishing or something. Maybe the moon won't fall if you catch Jabu Jabu or something. But the reward will probably just end up being rupees. Like, time is money, so you can use rupees to buy time from a time merchant. It sounds good, right? We're still thinking about it." None of those ideas made it into the final game, although the time merchant might have ultimately become the banker who breaks the laws of time. The guy who would have made the fishing minigame was Kazuaki Morita, a real-life fishing aficionado. He made the series' first fishing game in Link's Awakening and secretly created the fishing hole in his off hours for Ocarina. But he said if players lost track of time at Terminus Fishing Hole, the world would get destroyed, so he didn't make one. Apparently they had a change of heart though, because fishing holes were eventually added in Majora's 3DS remake, and you can even catch Lord Chapu Chapu, who's basically a tiny version of Jabu Jabu. Catching him doesn't stop time or really give you anything at all though, just bragging rights. According to series composer Koji Kondo, Each Zelda game's music has a specific theme. Wind Waker has an Irish influence, Twilight Princess is more reminiscent of Eastern Europe, and Majora's Mask is more like Chinese opera, which sounds like this. There's more than just these two, but Majora's theme and the Happy Mask Salesman's theme are a couple good examples. In another issue, the cinema scene director says only half the cutscenes made it into the final game. One he specifically mentions getting cut was a great fairy teaching Link how to do a spin attack. That scene's still on the cartridge though, and was discovered years later, along with cutscenes for the other 4 fairies in Termina, although they're clearly unfinished. One that's almost finished shows Link having to do sit-ups and push-ups to earn his double defense upgrade. So instead of the fairies just giving Link his rewards, it seems they were originally going to make him work for it. Unfortunately, it appears most of the other scrapped cutscenes got erased to free up cartridge space. A lot of ideas had to get scrapped because of the 1-year deadline. In one of these magazines, Miyamoto says, "A lot of people ended up working overtime due to the sheer volume of work that had to be done. Suffice it to say, this was one tough year, I assure you. As long as it was finished, anything was acceptable." I made it clear that that's what was most important. At the start, the staff seemed pretty stressed out. They were like, "There's no way we can make it in a year." Towards the end of development, Miyamoto tried to ease the tension with some small talk and what he calls naughty stories, but the Zelda team found him unbearable and said they just didn't have time for his rambling. Aonuma says he had to pull at least one all-nighter and didn't even have time to play the game start to finish before it released. Majora's writers revealed that some of the NPCs are actually speaking for the developers. Scriptwriter Mitsuhiro Takano said, "We put our feelings into the mouths of Termina's residents. Like when work was getting backed up, we wrote one carpenter to say, 'Damn, I'll have to stay up again. I wonder if I'll finish this.' And damn, guess I'm staying up again tonight. I wonder if it'll be ready in time." Another example I wrote when our work was interfering with home life was the mayor saying, "Don't tell my wife." And after we completed development, I wrote the mask salesman to say, "You've met with a terrible fate." In other words, the guys who worked on Majora's Mask felt they'd met with a terrible fate to have to make a Zelda game with such a tight deadline. At one point they went to a co-worker's wedding and still weren't off the clock. Takano remembers, "The groom had his hairstyle done like Kafe's. When we saw that, we thought, we can use this." We were hardly paying attention to the wedding ceremony, just saying, "This could all be game content." Koizumi chimes in, "It was right around that time there was an uproar over North Korea's Taepodong missile, and so we were joking around like, is it really a good idea to have a wedding when we're on the brink of destruction?" And Takano, Aonuma, and I were all excited at what good material this could make. The thought, is it really okay to put on a happy face and have a wedding, isn't a missile about to fall on us? That was a perfect allegory for the moon falling. Then they skipped the wedding reception because they were scared of getting vaporized. But they weren't only short on time. Cartridge space was a concern as well. The devs say they were constantly having to shave things down and search for content they were willing to cut so it'd all fit. All the boss animations took up an especially big chunk, like the first boss Odalwa's dancing. Speaking of which, Odalwa's name is a pun on the Japanese word Odaruwa, which means dance. In development, the bull boss was originally named Hashilwa, a pun on the word run, and the fish boss was Oyorg, a pun on the word swim. Every boss was named after the verb they represented, but all their names ended up getting changed, except Odalwa, who's the only boss in the final game still named after his verb to dance. Majora's Mask is sort of the black sheep of the series, with a story, setting, and tone very different to what came before. But there was one earlier Zelda game that was also pretty unique, Link's Awakening, which took place entirely in a dream. That game's weirdness was mostly thanks to one man, Yoshiaki Koizumi. He's long had sort of an adversarial relationship with Miyamoto when it comes to storytelling, like when he snuck Rosalina's storybook into Mario Galaxy without the big guy's permission. In one of these magazines, he says, "I worked on the plot of Link's Awakening. I did the main story, and Kensuke Tanabe wrote the side plots. I made quite a strange story, and afterwards Miyamoto told me he'd never let me do it again, but I consider that a compliment. I had wanted to do something that wasn't at all Miyamoto-esque." He goes on to say that for the next game, Ocarina of Time, Miyamoto only let him work on a few side quests, like the ones focused on Skull Kid and the Mask Shop. After Ocarina, Koizumi started working on a non-Zelda game that he described as using certain systems to replay something over and over. He said, "The plan I had was a game that had a fixed time period of 3 days or a week or so, and the townspeople having fixed schedules they followed. It was while doing that I went together with Miyamoto to America. The whole time he was complaining about how things weren't going well with Majora's development, and I was just like, oh yeah, that's too bad. I was busy planning that other game, and I was incredibly motivated. But then Miyamoto, his little whispers started calling to me, Zelda, Zelda, Zelda. And before I knew it, my game was cancelled. I was shocked. Once we got back to Japan, I had my entire situation explained to me, and I said I would join the Majora team, but only if I was allowed to do things my way." After that, Koizumi inserted a lot of the concepts from his cancelled game into Majora's Mask. 3 days played over and over, townspeople moving around on fixed schedules, and so on. Koizumi was responsible for everything that happened inside Clocktown, and Aonuma was in charge of everything outside, although Koizumi eventually invaded his territory and took control of Romani Ranch, arguing that it was really an extension of the town. And that's how Koizumi became Majora's co-director, and the game turned out as weird as it did, despite Miyamoto saying he'd never let him do it again. Speaking of weirdness in Romani Ranch, there's a cutscene most Zelda fans will never see, even if they get 100% completion. If you do the milk delivery side quest more than once, sometimes you're only rewarded with a gold rupee, but there's also a chance of getting a more adult reward. A special cutscene where Cremia thanks Link with a big hug, and his face is squeezed between her, moo-moos. The game says, "You feel all warm and fuzzy inside." You could get used to this. In one of these Japanese magazines, Koizumi says, "That was born out of a mistake. When we were setting up Link's position, we accidentally put him too close, and his face got lodged inside Cremia's model. When we saw that, we immediately wrote up a way to include it in the game. The script director and I thought that would be any boy's dream." And the interviewer says, "Yeah, I know. I was pretty happy about that." The whole development team actually had sort of a rivalry, dividing themselves up into 2 teams, Cremia fans and Anju fans. The 2 girls are friends, but the game hints at sort of a love triangle, with Cremia having a secret crush on Anju's fiancé. When the interviewer asked Aonuma which team he was on, he said neither girl was really to his liking. Others, like cutscene programmer Naoki Mori, had stronger feelings. He said, "Personally, I think Cremia, who hides her loneliness by smiling, is a better woman than Anju, who lets her unhappiness bubble up to the surface." Then he asks the magazine's readers, "But what do you think?" I don't know, I guess let us know in the comments under this video if you're Team Anju or Team Cremia. Besides Koizumi, another guy who had a huge influence on how Majora turned out was Takeya Imamura, who's probably best known as the creator of characters like Star Fox, Captain Falcon, and Tingle. Majora's Mask is actually kind of named after him. According to these magazines, the Japanese title Majora is a mix between Imamura and Jumanji. Yeah, the Robin Williams movie. Jumanji was kind of a big deal back then. Just like Koizumi, Imamura was brought onto the team mid-development when they were really struggling. Interestingly though, neither of them even wanted to work on Zelda. Throughout these magazine interviews, Koizumi and Imamura made it clear they were pretty much forced to work on Zelda. Imamura was offered the job of Majora's art director. He tried to refuse, but didn't have a choice, which turned out to be a blessing in disguise because the game wouldn't have been the same without him. If you'd gone to the 1999 Space World trade show, you'd see the moon didn't have a face, not in the playable demo, and not even in the promotional art. That's because Imamura added the moon's face about 2 months before the game was finished, and the moon's tear and most of the other moon-related content was created soon after. He told Nintendo Dream, "It really tied the whole game together. The moon's face was originally something I drew as a concept art sketch, and it just so happened that I drew a face on the moon, and Koizumi really liked it. Koizumi told me to give the moon a face that looked like Majora's Mask, but I ignored him and went with this face. I figured I'll use my own judgment and go with a face I like. No one's going to complain, it's fine. And besides, I've got seniority." Imamura says he originally drew the face of one of their superiors, but later changed it to the moon we know today. The inside of the moon was different as well. Originally it was more like a graveyard, but later on they changed it to a grassy hill. An idea they got from space battleship Yamato, the 1970s anime generally considered the granddaddy of Gundam and the entire space opera genre. Yamato's plot is actually pretty similar to Majora's Mask. In the game, Earth's threatened by an evil force that's making the moon fall, and Link's gotta go to the moon to save the world at the last minute. In the anime, Earth's threatened by an evil force making meteors fall, and the heroes have to go to the planet Iskandar to save the world at the last minute. And according to Koizumi, Iskandar was the direct inspiration for the inside of Majora's moon, which is pretty clear when you see them side by side. Explaining why, he said, "With the world of Majora being so strange, the inside of the moon being like the planet Iskandar provides contrast by being ordinary. In a fairy tale world, it's a realistic world. Or maybe I should say a picturesque world that makes you feel the greatest sense of unease. Clocktown changed too. Originally, it was a medieval European-style town, but the devs felt like it was too similar to Ocarina of Time. Koizumi said, "We also weren't happy with how the towns were at that point. Overall, it was pretty weak. So I asked our artist Yusuke Nakano to draw some quick concept art with a pencil. I was surprised to see that he made it all in full color, but those pictures got us the full go-ahead to go in that direction. He suggested we set it during a carnival, and we immediately decided to go with that. One of the guys who had to do the grunt work of actually rebuilding Clocktown started crying, but they say the tears ultimately paid off because what he ended up making was a lot better than the medieval Clocktown they started off with. When Majora's Mask was remade for the 3DS, Aonuma was asked about a few fan theories that cropped up over the past 15 years, like that Link's adventures in Termina are all a dream. He gets knocked unconscious in the opening cutscene. A lot of the characters are sort of dreamlike reimaginings of people in Hyrule, and one big hint is the inclusion of the Ballad of the Windfish. In Link's Awakening, Link plays the same tune to end the Windfish's dream, which erases the island where the game takes place. So is Termina a dream as well? Aonuma said no. The reason that this song from Link's Awakening was used in this game really came down to a decision by the sound team. They were looking for inspiration, something that would fit the theme, and since the previous game was about collecting instruments, it made sense that you would want to use that for a band in this case. For us, really, it was just a playful choice that referenced a previous game and nothing more than that. However, I love that people think about stuff like this, and I think it shows how they feel about the franchise as a whole that they're interested in these possibilities. Another theory is that Termina is a metaphor for the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. The townsfolk are in denial that the moon is going to destroy everything they hold dear. The Deku King is punishing the monkey out of anger. Darmani's ghost is bargaining for a return to the world of the living. Lulu's fallen into depression after the loss of her eggs, and Ikana is the land of death, representing the final stage of grief, acceptance. Was all this done intentionally by the developers, or was it just the fans' interpretation? Again, Aonuma basically said no, the concept was invented by the fans, not the writers. Quote, "It's certainly true that each one of these different episodes you talked about has a slightly different emotional cast to it. One feels like it's tinged with sadness, and another with anger. That certainly was intentional. But I also want to point out that it's not that each of these episodes has only one emotion that they're conveying. There are certainly other notes that we're trying to hit as well. And the reason we did this is to allow the player to experience that emotion, to give them a chance to hook into the emotional tone of the scene and react to it and feel like they want to accomplish something in the game as a result of it." Another curiosity was brought up to Aonuma. The other 3 transformation masks are the spirits of an individual Deku, Goron, and Zora. So whose soul is in the Fierce Deity mask? His answer? The best I can give you is just a suggestion. The best way to think of it is that the memories of all the people of Termina are inside the Fierce Deity mask. As for why it's so painful when Link puts on the transformation mask, he said it's because the spirits of the dead have unfinished business. However, some mysteries were left intentionally vague. Are the mask collectors on the moon the mask salesman's kids? Did Kafe turn back into an adult at the end, or was he stuck as a child forever? In these Japanese magazines, Koizumi says those questions were left unknowable on purpose. There are no answers, but he enjoys seeing fans cook up theories to answer them anyway.
Did you know? Peanut Park was once part of Super Mario Sunshine's hub world and not a stage. Not only are there unused portals in the park that link to the Noki Bay and Pianta Village levels, but the park also has an object dictating where Mario lands after leaving a stage. Delfino Plaza has this same object for when players re-enter the hub. The area was likely recycled into a stage due to the game's rushed development, which was hastily wrapped up to help sell GameCubes. Another unused idea seems to be that Yoshi was able to talk at one point. While footage doesn't exist, a drawing done by a correspondent of the UK's NGC magazine hinted that Yoshis could talk in footage shown to the press. Speaking of Yoshi, Sunshine was once planned to have a wearable Yoshi head for Mario that would spit out water. This was a concept developers thought about adding multiple times, and at one point they even considered having water shoot directly out of Mario's mouth. An unused Yoshi nozzle can still be found in the game's files, indicating this idea got further in development than previously thought. The game's director, Yoshiaki Koizumi, also wanted to include a water rifle for Mario, but felt it might cause age ratings issues in America. He was also afraid that consumers would see it as a gun, so some changes were made. Producer Takashi Tezuka stated, "Although we called it a water pistol, we tried to design it so that no associations could ever be made between it and actual weapons. So we were trying to design the weirdest and funniest gadget, which turned out to be a water tank you wear on your back." A pistol and a severed Yoshi head weren't the only ideas developers had for different flood attachments. They also considered having a nozzle resembling a firework or a sprinkler, but in the end scrapped them in order to fine-tune the 4 types of nozzles in the final game. Interestingly, the hover nozzle seems like it barely made it into the game. This is because the team felt it made the game too easy in some parts. In order to balance the game's difficulty, they removed FLUDD from the Mario action stages to give players more of a challenge. All in all, the team considered around 10 different nozzle attachments, meaning more than half of them were cut. One of these nozzles is actually referenced in unused text in the game's files. The so-called reverse nozzle, which the game points out as a temporary name, would have shot water behind Mario. The text also suggests it would give Mario a speed boost in races. It's possible this nozzle isn't just alluded to, but is still in the game's data under the title Dummy Nozzle. By loading the dummy nozzle through hacking, we can see what might have been. It's possible the idea was consolidated into the turbo nozzle, or was scrapped because it made aiming difficult. The unused text also suggests the reverse nozzle would break after some use, where it would be retrieved by a character named Rowney, who is possibly a human tourist that Mario would rescue. Cut dialogue also suggests the mayor would encourage Mario to help get a 5-star tourism rating for Delfino Plaza, possibly by cleaning up the plaza. The idea of using water in a Mario title came to Koizumi very early on. The team wanted to expand upon the options for the player, and used Mario's movement from Super Mario 64 as a base. When Koizumi first held the GameCube controller, he imagined using the right trigger as a water pistol, and the concept evolved from there. Koizumi wasn't the only one impressed with the GameCube controller. In a talk with Nintendo, Miyamoto stated, "Get accustomed to the GameCube controller because 10 years from now, this controller will be the standard." Ironically, in the game's re-release on the Switch 18 years later, Sunshine wouldn't be fully compatible with the GameCube controller. The graffiti system may have been the first feature in the game that Nintendo experimented with, going as far back as Mario 64. In an April 2002 Famitsu interview, Miyamoto stated, "The game really started once we had the graffiti system. Actually, during Mario 64's development, we had a completely blank Goomba. We had a plan to let players paint a face on the Goomba. From there we conducted a variety of experiments. This eventually led us to where we are now, where we have given the player a lot of freedom, and they can do things such as erasing the graffiti off the road in the town." Relics of the team's experiments can be found in the game's data, such as unused pollution maps. Some of these unused pollution maps included notes by the developers, while others are creepy images featuring enemies. One of these pollution maps even features the Japanese word for stupid written on it. When Koizumi first approached Tezuka and Miyamoto about his ideas for Sunshine, he was met with some resistance. Changing Mario's clothes was controversial, but in the end, the duo gave Mario a short-sleeved shirt. 15 years later, Koizumi would get his wish of giving the player more clothing options with Super Mario Odyssey. Sunshine would be a continuation of Koizumi's approach to sandbox gameplay in Mario games. This style, previously seen in Mario 64, is described as having the player explore a set environment while giving them an objective to complete. It was inspired by box gardens, or hakoniwa in Japan. Box gardens focus on creating a miniaturized landscape in containers, often creating a sense of realism within them. Koizumi would again return to this style with Mario Odyssey. In order to get the island aesthetic right, the team examined travel brochures and pictures from island resorts, and even invited travel agents to Nintendo to discuss the resort aesthetic. Koizumi stated that some employees even took it upon themselves to research tropical life by taking vacations in Southeast Asia on their own dime. Koizumi made some of his own contributions, like physically sculpting a clay model of Isle Delfino, which helped the team visualize the island and the locations within it. Looking at the sculpture, it seems there were several changes between how Koizumi initially envisioned the island and its final look. The airstrip may have been a separate landing pad originally south of Delfino Plaza, not northeast. The white marks on the clay model might also indicate that 10 levels were initially planned. Looking through the unused stage names, it seems there are several unused entries. One of them is called Scale Map, which could have been used for testing, or was a cut stage. There are also several entries that are reserved for levels, 19 in total. In an interview with Nintendo, Koizumi stated that Animal Crossing scriptwriter also helped write the dialogue for Delfino's residents. By comparing the staff role for the original Animal Crossing and Mario Sunshine, it seems this person was Makoto Wada, who also worked on series such as Star Tropics and Punch-Out! Possibly as an homage to Animal Crossing, a gyroid is present in the texture sheet for the waiting room, but is unused in the final game. Several colors of the Pianta tribe can also be found unused in the game's code. Most of the cut colors are similar to colors that were used, or are very dark-skinned. It's possible the team wanted to avoid any racial controversy, so the dark Piantas were removed from the game. Early screenshots of Mario Sunshine show some of the unused colors in action. Other ideas were scrapped during development. In trailer footage shown off at Space World 2001, a soccer ball can be seen in Isle Delfino. Looking through unused data for Sunshine, the soccer ball can be found along with a goal, which even has an animation for when the player scores. Between the trailer footage and unused animation, it's clear this idea got quite far into development. Miyamoto has stated, "Game creators in general are putting so many mini-games in games today. I'm concerned that they're spending too much energy on these extra features and not enough on the larger game." Exactly why it was cut is unknown, but Miyamoto's quote may suggest some extra content was trimmed from Sunshine in order to focus on the main game. There's also a secret yellow toad under Delfino Plaza that's loaded after unlocking Pina Park. By speaking to him, Mario will say, "Arrivederci," and a dialogue box will appear saying, "Mario, the princess was taken that way, across the river." Mario will instantly lose all his health and respawn after losing a life. This oddity was fixed in the PAL release. It seems that toads were planned to wear sunglasses at one point during development. An unused file named kinopiosunmegane.bmd can be found in the game, with sunmegane meaning sunglasses. Speaking of sunglasses, when Mario is near water wearing his Shine Sprite shirt, his sunglasses do not appear in the reflection. Toads aren't the only objects hidden from the player's gaze. There are a bunch of bananas hidden above the sky over Delfino Plaza. The bananas can only be found by utilizing Yoshi's infinite flutter jump glitch. There are also some coconuts hidden in Pina Park underground, which normally can't be seen by the player. If Mario is able to move during the Pina Park cutscene, the Noki boy and Noki girl are missing body parts. Speaking of mistakes, error handlers are used in the game when the text that was meant to be displayed can't be found. In international versions of Sunshine, characters say, "Error, message could not be loaded" when there's a mix-up calling their dialogue. In the Japanese version, however, if a character's dialogue can't be brought up, they'll instead talk about the sunlight or their desire to eat some rice. In order to market the game, Nintendo pulled no stops for their main plumber. In the United States, Nintendo broke a Guinness World Record by serving the biggest plate of pasta ever. They gave out 3,265 pounds of pasta alla Mario in San Francisco, where Nintendo fans dressed as Mario dove into the pasta to find prizes, including a trip to Hawaii. Other regions had a tamer marketing plan. In Japan, Nintendo collaborated with Japan Rails by hosting a stamp rally, which rewarded players with one of 3 unique pin badges, or if they were lucky, a duffel bag sporting the Mario Sunshine logo. In Australia, Nintendo held several meet and greets with Mario, which was announced on their website by Charles Martinet as a disembodied Mario head.
Did you know? Fire Red and Leaf Green were specifically designed for girls, or that the very first room made for the game was your own room, or that Game Freak got stuck on it for a long time before they could move on to the rest of Kanto, or that Satoru Iwata helped boost the game to feel like more of a remake instead of just a port. 5 years ago, we made a Fire Red and Leaf Green video because there wasn't a dedicated trivia video on all of YouTube. Compared to other Pokemon games, there are very, very few interviews for the series' first remakes. So when we recently found an 8-page interview in an old Japanese magazine that teased, quote, the untold story behind the latest Pokemon game's development, our curiosity was piqued, especially since it was just a few days before these games came to Switch. So we translated it and curated the highlights. Let's get right to it. The interview was published in Nintendo Dream's March 2004 issue and took place in Game Freak's Tokyo headquarters. It's a big building, so they only occupied the 3rd and 5th floors. They'd been here since Generation 1's development, though back then they only had the 3rd floor, which is why in Kanto, Game Freak's office is on the 3rd floor of the Celadon condominiums. In real life, they shared their building with a cram school, and you can see a sign in the window that says, "Hang in there, test takers." Nowadays, they've upgraded to a much fancier office, with a lobby based on Viridian Forest, and meeting rooms themed around Kanto's towns. Instead of sharing with a cram school, now they're in a building with Nintendo. The magazine met with 4 prominent Game Freakers: director Junichi Masuda, his right-hand man and lead planner Koji Nishino, the lead programmer Tetsuya Watanabe, and graphics lead Takao Uno. They all worked on the original games too, except Uno, who was just one of 50 million fans back in the day. We'll talk more about his transition from fan to team member later on. Game Freak says before starting development, they all went back and played Red and Green on the Game Boy. It was harder to go back to than they remembered, with cries of, "There's no color, the screen is too small, and the programming sucks." Fortunately, they'd fixed all that in the remakes. While children, and especially young boys, were the target audience for Red and Green, these games would be designed for a different demographic: girls. And mums, too. Grandmas, even. Masuda stresses that repeatedly in the interview. They really wanted to broaden the player base, and part of that was making Fire Red and Leaf Green the easiest games in the series. Lots of small details were tailored for a female audience as well. For example, boys will play for hours on end, but girls are more likely to have gaps in their playtime. So they added a feature that when you load your save file, it will remind you of what you did in your last play session. And they redesigned the Pokédex to look less electronic and more like a paper encyclopedia. Series creator Satoshi Tajiri wasn't intimately involved with development, but the team says he supervised all the remake's changes. In the original Red and Green, he wrote all the dialogue himself, and the staff committed to not changing a single word. Masuda told the team they could add more text, but couldn't remove anything written by Tajiri. The English versions were heavily revised though, from the very first line out of Professor Oak's mouth. Nintendo of America's Nob Ogasawara localized the originals and the remakes. The localization process was a mess back in the 90s and had gotten better in the years since, so the remakes are actually more faithful to Tajiri's original words. Here's a bit of trivia from outside the interview, by the way. Nob's birthday is February 27th, the same day Red and Green came out. That's the only reason he happened to buy them back in 1996, which ultimately led to him becoming the official localizer. If not for that coincidence, the English versions could have turned out pretty different. Translation is an art, after all, not a science, and no 2 localizers would translate in the same exact way. But let's get back to that magazine. Game Freak says aside from girls, they also want to capture the elderly. In fact, development began with the slogan, "Pokemon that even 60-year-olds can play." So they assigned the new guy, Takao Uno, to make the starting house Giza-proof. As we mentioned in a previous video, art director Ken Sugimori's dad tried playing Pokemon, but couldn't figure out how to go outside. For someone who's never played a video game, I guess it's understandable they wouldn't think to stand on a carpet and push down. Early on, I made tons of designs for doors and stairs, only for Masuda to say they weren't simple enough, remembers Uno. I had to redo the interiors extensively, and he wouldn't let me move on to the rest of Kanto until I got it right. Eventually, he did get it right, and here you can see the senior-friendly house compared to the original. The stairs look like actual stairs, and the doorway juts a little outside. People unfamiliar with controllers tend to push the L and R buttons on accident, so Game Freak made those buttons open the new Help menu. We could go on with all the ways they catered to old-timers, but you get the idea. After they were done, Masuda gave his own parents a copy in a Game Boy Advance SP. Their son was director of the world's most popular IP, but they had never played it. They took the machine from Masuda's hands and played it like this. Masuda protested that they're not supposed to hold it like a calculator, but they managed to catch a few Pokemon anyway. Sadly, he says they probably won't play all the way to the credits. Then he tells readers, if you buy it, please let your mum play. And grandma too. So, did Game Freak's plan to broaden their audience succeed? No, actually. Not in terms of sales, anyway. Fire Red and Leaf Green were the worst-selling paired release so far, and didn't lose that distinction till nearly a decade later when Black and White 2 came out. Fire Red and Leaf Green were massively profitable anyway, though, selling 12 million copies. Not bad, considering Game Freak made them in a single year. For context, Heart Gold and Soul Silver took 3 years to make. Speaking of sales, it's easy to find how much each paired release sold, but what's not well documented is which versions sold more. In fact, the info we did find online turned out to be wrong, but in this interview, Masuda says Fire Red outsold Leaf Green, which he chalks up to Charizard's popularity. 8 years before, Pokemon Red was selling way more than Green. That led to Red selling out and people having to buy Green instead, since that's all that was left. As a result, Masuda says Red and Green ended up selling almost exactly equal. By the way, in another magazine, he says Silver sold more than Gold. But while most folks wanted Red, there was one person who preferred Green, Takao Uno. Back then, he heard the buzz, he saw the TV commercials, but Pokemon didn't interest him. It wasn't till he went in a game shop and saw Venusaur on the cover. This is so cool, he thought. Then he bought it, picked Bulbasaur, and now here he is, lead graphics designer on the remake. When he got appointed, he asked, "Are you sure I'm the right person for the job?" Through the rest of development, he was nervous if he could really do it. "We'll let you be the judge of how well he did." By the way, he'd later create the Chimchar family, the Sword of Justice trio, Arceus, Zeraora, and quite a few more. One of the remake's biggest updates is wireless trading and battling. Originally, Game Freak was just going to use the GBA link cable, but then Iwata and Ishihara came to Masuda, whipped out a wireless adapter, and were like, "Ta-da! Check this thing out. What do you think?" Masuda thought the game would sell just fine without it, but Iwata insisted, saying it'd help Fire Red and Leaf Green feel like more than simple ports, and could be a real selling point. So Masuda relented, and talked him into bundling the adapter in for free. They'd cut costs on the cartridge by not having an internal clock for a day-night cycle, so they could afford a little generosity. It ended up being a great deal for fans, since otherwise a wireless adapter cost $20, but with Pokemon, it came free. Then you could use it with Emerald, Mario Golf, Mega Man Battle Network, and dozens of other games. Well, in Japan, it was free. In America, Fire Red and Leaf Green cost $5 more than a standard Game Boy Advance game. Game Freak's programmers couldn't implement it on their own, though, so Iwata sent over some Nintendo engineers to help him out for a few months. When Fire Red and Leaf Green were finished, Nintendo helped them debug too. The original Red and Green were famously filled with bugs, even more than overseas versions. Lead programmer Watanabe says they hadn't gotten any better at programming since then. Hence, they desperately needed the assistance. Like Ruby and Sapphire, Fire Red and Leaf Green feature some puzzles based on Braille, the writing system for blind folks. Masuda repeatedly stresses that he wants everyone to learn Braille for blind people's sake. Inserting Braille puzzles into Pokemon games was his way of trying to make that dream a reality. In Japan, Fire Red and Leaf Green came with a fold-out chart for interpreting Braille. Iwata insisted on its inclusion and encouraged them to add even more Braille puzzles to the game. They hoped fans would carry it around wherever they go. Australia got that insert too, so solving puzzles was just a matter of consulting the interpretation chart and maybe they'd learn Braille in the process. In Europe, it was a page in the instruction manual, but for some reason, America didn't get any of that. Instead, the manual just says to call the Nintendo hotline if you can't figure it out on your own, which wasn't exactly free. Sites like Bulbapedia didn't have answers back then, so at launch, Americans would have had to buy a strategy guide or go digging through message boards, and almost certainly wouldn't have learned Braille in the process. In a strange case of history kinda repeating itself, the official Japanese site for the Switch re-release has that 20-year-old Braille chart linked right on the homepage, along with a history lesson on how it was invented by a teenager in the 1800s. But it's not on the official English website. None of this is a big deal in 2026, thanks to Bulbapedia and all that. But it is kind of weird it's happening again. At one point, they talk about Fire Red and Leaf Green's commercials, and this one in particular.
あのポケモンたちと一緒に新しくなった冒険へ出かけよう。ポケットモンスター、ファイアレッドとリーフグリーン。
A Pokemon PR guy in the corner asks if they made Pikachu rarer in the Viridian Forest, because they couldn't find one while filming the commercial. They were recording and filled up tape after tape of useless footage, after hours of encountering nothing but bug Pokemon. Nishino says no, people are buying this game to chase old memories, and changing those kind of details would be a betrayal of longtime fans. So Pikachu's encounter rate is still 5%, just as it always was. The ad guys must have just had bad luck. They did tweak encounter rates elsewhere though, but only where it was important, like lowering Zubats in Rock Tunnel. If you played the original games, you'll recall that cave having way too many Zubats. Later on, the magazine dives into the personal lives of Pokemon's developers. Nishino says he loves collecting Gachapon, which are vending machines with miniature toys inside. Just like Pokemon, some toys are rarer than others. I'd be lying if I said I didn't reference Gachapon in Pokemon, he says. It helps me understand what people want and how to make them want it, and limiting quantities to make certain things hard to get. He talks about seeking out rare colors of toys he's already got, which makes us wonder if shinies were born from this Gachapon obsession. Nishino says he also enjoys collecting Pokemon merchandise. He could get it all for free, but chooses not to, because he enjoys shopping and the thrill of the hunt. Watanabe and his fellow programmer Morimoto are huge horse race gamblers and go to the track every day they get off work. They think of themselves as evangelists who got a lot of other Game Freak staff into horse gambling too. The interviewer asks if maybe someday Game Freak will make a horse racing game. Watanabe laughs and says that'll never happen. But actually, it did happen a decade later when they released Pocket Card Jockey on 3DS. Uno, however, is extremely embarrassed to share his own interests. Eventually, he admits his hobby is editing idol videos. You know, young female pop stars. He's very insistent that he doesn't watch those videos. He just makes them. After asking Masuda's permission, he says his favorite is Aya Matsura, who was 17 and one of Japan's most popular solo acts at the time. On the final page, the developers tell us how they want us to best enjoy these remakes. Nishino says we should play slowly and leisurely, not trying to rush through to the end. Read the dialogue and soak it all in. Don't mash A in a hurry. As for Masuda, he says he wants fans to complete the Pokédex. The interviewer asks if we have both versions, and Ruby and Sapphire and Pokemon Colosseum, are we going to be able to catch them all? Masuda says, no. 3 were still unobtainable. Mew and Deoxys, who weren't distributed till later mythical events. And more importantly, Lugia, who'd later star in Gale of Darkness, a GameCube spin-off that wasn't even announced yet. The magazine notes that Masuda has a wry smile, and in hindsight, it's obvious that Gale of Darkness was the reason why. The game was still a secret, although technically, Lugia was in some distribution events before that. Point is, eventually, getting every last Pokemon in Fire Red and Leaf Green was possible. Though we should note, for folks playing on Switch, only about half are obtainable. The interviewer wraps up by asking what's next for Game Freak. Masuda says Ruby and Sapphire and Fire Red and Leaf Green mark the end of a cycle for the series. Next, he aims to make the ultimate Pokemon game. The programmers are like, what?
Did you know, in SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom, the attack of the tubulant robot enemies changes when the game is played on specific holidays. On New Year's Day, they shoot rainbow-colored flames. On St. Patrick's Day, the fire is green. On April Fool's Day, the color is pink. On July 4th, the American Independence Day, they're red, white, and blue. And on Halloween, the flames are orange. Another interesting secret can be found in the Goo Lagoon level. One of the sandcastle sculptures at the edge of the level is a reference to a game console from the past. It's in the shape of an Atari 2600 controller. Battle for Bikini Bottom was created using the base of a previous game by developer Heavy Iron Studios, Scooby-Doo Night of 100 Frights. The Xbox version of Battle for Bikini Bottom even has the intro animation of Scooby-Doo left over in the game files. By searching through these hidden files, fans have also discovered a lot of content that was removed before the game was released. The robot SpongeBob boss has an unused phase where it fights Patrick using the anchor arms from one of the cutscenes. It was partially programmed and would have been defeated by Patrick throwing debris at the targets on its arms. It's possible SpongeBob himself was planned to use the anchor arms too. An unused texture called muscle arms can be found in the game's files, and it is attributed to SpongeBob in the file name. The smelly sundae from the Season 2 episode Something Smells was originally planned to be a power-up as well. It's possible to hack the effects of the sundae back into the game, and it allows SpongeBob and Patrick to break stone tikis with their regular attack. The game's data also contains an unfinished dream sequence for Patrick in SpongeBob's dream level. It's based on candy and food, and it has a few early assets like the tikis that differ from those in the final game. An entire robot boss fight was also cut from the game. Like Sandy, Patrick, and SpongeBob, Squidward was also going to have his own robot boss. Concept art of the boss fight can be found in the movie theater, and it appears as though SpongeBob would have fought the robot by pressing switches and dropping rocks on it. There are unused audio files relating to all boss characters buried in the data, but there are no references to Robot Squidward, which suggests it was cut early in development. The Game Boy Advance version of the game still includes the Robot Squidward boss fight in the final version. The SpongeBob SquarePants movie game has many interesting secrets as well. In the level Welcome to Planktopolis, Minions, Heavy Iron Studios hid their best records for the time trial levels in a secret spot. A hidden alcove can be reached by heading to a high ledge that overlooks a lava pit across from two large plankton statues. Falling off the ledge next to the wall will lead players to a hidden spot, where after a few moments, a window will pop up displaying the time trial records. The developers included another reference to their studio in the Shell City Dead Ahead level. A license plate can be found among the piles of garbage that reads HVY-IRN, an abbreviation of Heavy Iron. Another interesting fact about the game has to do with Patrick's underwear. Even though it's never seen in-game, fans have discovered the model for Patrick is clothed with fully textured Goofy Goober tighty whities under his shorts. Later in the game, when SpongeBob and Patrick arrive on the beach and meet David Hasselhoff like they do in the movie, he's never actually referred to by name. This is likely because the publisher THQ lacked the licensing rights to use his name and likeness. Instead, the character just vaguely resembles David Hasselhoff.
I'm not a lifeguard, but I play one on TV.
Hooray! The line, "I'm not a lifeguard, but I play one on TV," references Hasselhoff's role as a lifeguard on the TV drama Baywatch. The SpongeBob SquarePants movie game for PC used a different workaround for the licensing issues. Rather than referring to Hasselhoff's character as a lifeguard, he is instead treated as a mythical beast, and his name is censored with a dolphin noise. Unlike the console versions, the PC version of the SpongeBob SquarePants movie game is a point-and-click adventure, and it also contains references to PC games from the past. During the 5th chapter, when SpongeBob tries to leave the bounds of the level and enter areas blocked by fog, he says,
"It's too foggy to see. I could get eaten by a Gru."
This is a reference to Zork, the classic 1980 text-based adventure game. In Zork, if players tried to explore dark areas without a source of light, the game would warn, "It's pitch black. You are likely to be eaten by a Gru." The SpongeBob SquarePants movie game was briefly available for the PlayStation 3 as a digital download under the PS2 Classics line. Unfortunately, this port was rushed and sloppy. The resolution was stuck on stretched, meaning players had to manually set the resolution every time they played. The audio and video would become desynchronized during cutscenes with delays of over a second between the animations and sound.
You have got to try this new dot broom game.
Dude!
Where?
And there was noticeable input lag, which caused problems during platforming and combat. The game was pulled off the PlayStation Store relatively soon after being released without an official explanation, but most gamers assumed it was due to the technical issues. SpongeBob SquarePants' first appearance in a major video game wasn't a game of his own, but in a kart racer called Nicktoons Racing. It was first released for the Game Boy Color, but subsequent versions came out for the Game Boy Advance and the original PlayStation. There was even a full-sized arcade version, complete with a chair in the shade of Nickelodeon orange. Speaking of ensemble-style games, SpongeBob was cited by Super Smash Bros. Creator Masahiro Sakurai to be a very popular request for a new playable fighter. Unfortunately, Sakurai shot down any hopes of the yellow sponge appearing in Nintendo's brawler. In an interview, Sakurai mentioned the massive support for SpongeBob, but along with Goku from Dragon Ball, he said these multimedia characters are impossible to implement. The game SpongeBob SquarePants Creature from the Krusty Krab had a feature that was prevented from being added because of guidelines from the licensor. Andrew Oliver of Blitz Games had originally planned for the Wii version to have shooter-style segments that used the Wii remote like a gun. Ultimately, the developers decided against it. Oliver explained, "It's a cartoon license and Nickelodeon were uncomfortable with shooting. It's not that we couldn't do it, but it added risk if we went down that route and were told it couldn't go in. When you're aiming for a launch title, you don't need to confront obvious approval worries." One SpongeBob SquarePants game was so flawed that it may have led to the closure of the studio that created it. SpongeBob SquarePants Revenge of the Flying Dutchman, developed by Big Sky Interactive, had generally poor reviews all around, but the PlayStation 2 version was particularly problematic. The game frequently froze on loading screens between different areas, and it caused players to actually lose their save files. The poor quality and bugs may have been due to internal problems the studio faced during development. Big Sky Interactive was originally the American branch of a French company called Callisto Entertainment. While the studio was in the middle of creating another game based on a Nickelodeon franchise, Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius, their French parent company filed for bankruptcy. Having all the resources available to continue the operation on their own, the American branch split and became Big Sky Interactive. Soon after that, Big Sky heard that Nickelodeon was looking for a developer to bring SpongeBob to the PS2 and GameCube. Many members of Big Sky were huge fans of SpongeBob, and the studio needed work, so they created a demo using the code from Jimmy Neutron. In an interview at E3 2002, Big Sky Interactive co-founder Matt Scabilia explained, "A handful of people, mostly artists, took the technology we'd been working on and created a full working level of SpongeBob in 2 weeks, with gameplay, platforms, animations, a collection of items, and a working HUD. While the competition may have had a design doc or some models, we had a full playable demo working on the target platform." They landed the contract and developed the game, but unfortunately, Revenge of the Flying Dutchman sold very poorly after the negative reception. The game was the last project by Big Sky Interactive, and Nickelodeon partnered with Heavy Iron Studios for future SpongeBob projects.
Did you know? Despite being longtime rivals with Nintendo, Sega drew inspiration from multiple Nintendo games while developing Sonic Adventure. Sonic Adventure's director Takashi Iizuka once told IGN.com that Super Mario 64 was one of his favorite games of all time. But despite Iizuka's love for this Nintendo 64 classic, he also saw a significant flaw in the game's design. We recently translated a 2016 Japanese Famitsu interview into English where Iizuka states, "Super Mario 64 came before us as a 3D action game, but I remember not understanding where I was supposed to go the first time I played it. The old Sonic games were designed so you could get to the goal by just pressing left or right, so with Sonic Adventure, we didn't want it to be the kind of game where you don't know where to go. That thought process was what gave birth to the system that points the camera in the direction you're supposed to go." Mainline 2D Sonic games have always had the player hold one direction to move forward, so if the 3D camera in Sonic Adventure always leaned towards where the player should be going, players could simply hold up to cover ground. This would mimic the progression of 2D Sonic titles and intuitively bring the series' gameplay into the third dimension. Having the camera move this way also meant Sonic Team could create complex 3D levels without having to worry about the players getting lost. Iizuka would go on to tell Retro Gamer magazine, "After thinking up this camera system, we tried it out on Speed Highway and found it was successful. It's interesting that Nintendo would ultimately integrate a similar camera system in future 3D Super Mario titles after the release of Sonic Adventure. Some might even expect the first true 3D Sonic game to take cues from the first 3D Mario game, but what about that other Nintendo game that inspired Sonic Adventure's development? Just like that of an action RPG, Sonic Team wanted to include locations where the player could talk to NPCs to get information, or acquire new power-ups, or even just explore and become captivated by. They called these places adventure fields. Takashi Iizuka explained to Retro Gamer that he wanted to make these adventure fields have places in them that were only accessible after acquiring some sort of new power or ability, and even went on to say, "I was probably inspired in some way through the Legend of Zelda series that I loved so much." One aspect of Sonic Adventure that's beloved by most fans is its music, and it's evident that Adventure's lead composer Jun Sanue went to great lengths to make sure the music stood the test of time. During an interview in 2017, Sanue stated that he'd actually scrapped 8 different main themes for the game before he'd finally come up with the iconic track Open Your Heart. And it was also the sound and feel of the track that came first, with the lyrics becoming almost totally different over time. But the music and culture behind it had been impacting Sonic Adventure's identity long before Open Your Heart had even been conceived. In the mid-90s, Sonic Team shifted focus and developed a few non-Sonic titles such as Nights into Dreams and Burning Rangers. And as a result of no new mainline Sonic games being released, the team realized Sonic's popularity had dropped. They even felt that the public perception of Sonic had shifted to the point where the character felt safe and ordinary. At the same time, some members of Sonic Team had noticed that games like Space Invaders and Pac-Man were becoming popular again within the counterculture, and were being used prominently in urban fashion and indie music. Sonic Adventure's art director, Kazuyuki Hoshino, told Retro Gamer, "It made us jealous, and we wanted Sonic to also become popular with this edge of subculture, or at least have some cool t-shirts being made with Sonic on them. So we all got together to try and find this new graphic style for Sonic." What it boiled down to was a graphic style and pose that was more aware of the fashion trends. The artwork was a good fit for the club music I was really into at the time. When Hoshino says, "We all got together to try and find this new graphic style for Sonic," he's referring to a contest that was held within Sega. Sega's early attempts at putting Sonic in a 3D world all used designs similar to his 16-bit appearance. But this caused a problem. Sonic's head would obscure his body and limbs from various angles. It was clear to the team that Sonic's design had to be reworked for Sonic Adventure, and the solution seemed to come from the artwork of Satoshi Okano. Okano isn't well known in the industry, but he played a pivotal role in reworking Sonic's design, and sadly his contribution has gone largely ignored. The story goes that Sonic team lead Yuji Naka came across Satoshi Okano's Sonic Jam art, and was so inspired by it that Naka decided to hold a contest among Sega's artists to find a new look for Sonic. Okano took part, but it was Sega artist Yuji Uekawa who would win the contest to create the final Sonic redesigns for Adventure, which were somewhat inspired by graffiti art. However, it seems Okano may have had a bigger hand in Sonic's redesign than you might have guessed. In April 2020, Okano told researcher Sean Aitchison, "Before New Sonic, I had drawn an illustration of Sonic, and Yuji Uekawa finished it. Because of that, the initial New Sonic illustrations were a 2-person effort." This is something very few Sega employees know about. Okano would go on to create the Japanese cover art for Sonic 3D Blast on the Saturn, and serve as a character designer for Samba de Amigo. However, yet again, Yuji Uekawa would receive sole credit as character designer on Samba de Amigo. Okano says he has no ill will towards Uekawa or anyone else at Sega, and good for him. But we have to point out how it's kind of messed up that a significant contribution to both games has been ignored, and we're happy to shine a light on it. But back to Adventure's development. The team took it upon themselves to make a new Sonic game that fans would feel was worth the wait. They first set out to create Sonic Adventure on the Sega Saturn, as it was Sega's main platform at the time, but the team found the system lacked the power to implement their ideas in 3D. This is when Sonic Team heard rumblings of Sega's next fully 3D console, the Dreamcast. The team even had some requests so they could make Sonic Adventure the way they truly wanted, meaning Sonic Adventure ended up actually influencing the power of the Dreamcast. Takashi Iizuka recalled, "To create a 3D stage where Sonic could run around at high speed, we needed a lot of internal memory on the hardware. Since the Dreamcast was still in the planning stages, we were able to spec out the design for Sonic, and then we were able to put in a request to the hardware team about the required memory we would need in the machine, which really helped us execute on the design of the game. We started developing the game when the hardware was only about 30% complete, so we were constantly trying to imagine what the final spec for the machine might be as we were creating the content. But this also meant the pressure was on for Sonic Team. Sonic Adventure would now be a Dreamcast launch title and needed to showcase what the system could do. To give a sense that the new console's graphics were high spec, the team decided they should aim for a realistic style with Sonic Adventure's graphics. And of course, this would carry on to the game's sequel. However, Sonic Adventure 2 had some not so realistic inspirations. Shiro Maekawa returned to write this game's story and has since stated that he was heavily influenced by anime and manga he had been watching and reading since childhood. One example of how manga and anime impacted Sonic Adventure 2 was given by Maekawa during a 2006 Sonic Channel interview. In the game, we're able to see Shadow and Maria looking at Earth from the space colony. This moment was greatly influenced by the sci-fi romance manga and anime Please Save My Earth. Please Save My Earth focuses on a group of students who realize they all share a collective dream and live out alternate lives within a moon base while dreaming. In both the manga and anime, the characters Shion and Mokurin are seen embracing each other beside a window, with the Earth in full view. It's not surprising Maekawa would reference this scene, considering he puts Please Save My Earth in his top 3 manga of all time. And by some huge coincidence, the actress Yuri Shiratori, who voices Alice in the anime, that's Mokurin's schoolgirl Earthling counterpart and lead of the show, ended up being cast as Maria in the Japanese version of Sonic Adventure 2. Maekawa said it seemed like destiny, but it also seems like he was pushing for Sonic to go into space from the get-go. Early on in the game's production, Maekawa proclaimed in front of all his colleagues, "Sonic will go to space this time, because it's become the 21st century already." At first, everyone was shocked at this choice in story direction, but everyone eventually got on board, leading to the space colony section of the game being made. Interestingly, Maekawa is not a fan of Sonic's character in the 16-bit games, and felt that it didn't fit Sonic at all. So when he got the chance to write the story for Sonic Adventure, he set out to create a version of Sonic that he himself would like. But for Sonic Adventure 2, Maekawa ended up writing his favorite character of the entire franchise, Shadow the Hedgehog. Early on in the game's development, it had already been decided that there would be a black hedgehog character, but other than being cool like Sonic, his personality had not been yet settled on. That wasn't until late one night on the drive home from work when Shadow crept into Maekawa's mind. Maekawa was mentally going over the scene where Sonic confronts Shadow for the first time, and Sonic blurts out, "I found you, faker." Shadow spoke out in Maekawa's mind for the first time, saying, "Faker? I think you're the fake hedgehog around here." Maekawa grew fond of Shadow and even told Sonic Channel, "There are times when I feel a stronger bond with Shadow than my true relatives. I cannot think of others anymore." One of the most fondly remembered aspects of the Sonic Adventure games are the Chow, and there's quite a few interesting facts relating to these little critters too. There's an unused line in Sonic Adventure 2's data where Amo Chow states,
"Did you know the doctor's mustache is fake?"
This voice clip had been used to infer that Dr. Eggman's mustache is fake by some extremely poor fact checkers, but this is actually not the case. The Japanese version has a nearly identical piece of unused audio, which makes it clear that Amo Chow is not referring to Eggman but to a Dr. Chow, another name for the Chow principal, who has a suspiciously fake-looking mustache. And another unused line has Amo Chow say,
"Don't play a TV game over 1 hour."
Which frankly is advice you can ignore. But what you shouldn't ignore is this curious piece of data that went undiscovered for over 2 decades. In the root directory of all US copies of the Dreamcast version of Sonic Adventure, there's some old file upload data in the form of 2 bin files, Sonic ADV_H00.bin and Sonic ADV_H04.bin. These files use an earlier structure compared to the final file format, and while they aren't compatible with any version of the final game as is, there is some interesting data within these files. Within one of these files is actually a baby Chow called Buddy. The Chow is about 65% of the way towards evolving and wears a set of rabbit ears. This little guy was submitted by Sega at concentric.net, which is presumably a Sega employee. Sonic Adventure 2 has 20 unique types of Chow, but only 10 can be obtained normally, including DLC Chow. A lot of these unobtainable Chow are only seen in the Chow races, but can be put into the gardens with cheats. That said, there are 2 kinds of Chow that go completely unused. These are actually part of a trio along with the Moon Chow, a Dreamcast DLC Chow. While most unused Chow from the original game were removed from Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, even more unused Chow can be found along with all the unique types of eggs that go along with them. There's also another set of eggs linked to Chow, but due to the way these Chow are acquired, the eggs go unused. Just like most eggs in the game, these eggs also have shiny variants. Exclusively within Sonic Adventure 2's original release, a picture can be seen on the walls of the Chow Kindergarten showing a playground. There's even textures within the game that match the picture from the kindergarten. And when these textures are applied to geometry discovered within the PC version, we can get an idea of what this area would have looked like, and the impression that it was once a playable area. It seems there was also a library planned at some point, and based on its file name, it seems like it was also planned to be accessible from the kindergarten. In the library, players could download or create new stories for Chao Adventure 2. While this was never fully implemented, Chao Adventure 2 still had the modular design needed to support multiple stories, and there's 10 unused story files on the disc. Fans have heavily requested for Chao and Chao Gardens to return to the Sonic series. But why exactly did they disappear in the first place? According to a 2004 Takashi Iizuka interview with Electronic Gaming Monthly, it's because a Chao Garden would apparently have broken up the action of Sonic games post-adventure. Iizuka told EGM, "In Sonic Adventure, we created the Chao Garden so that new players would be forced to go out, explore the action sections, and find flickies and things. In Sonic Heroes, even if you're completely new to Sonic, you can play as Team Rose and learn how the game works. The level up items are the new motivating factor in Heroes." Iizuka would go on to say that flickies were removed from Heroes so that folks who played Sonic Adventure wouldn't be confused and think there was a Chao Garden hidden somewhere, and also that the Sonic Adventure sub-series hadn't ended. Based on this, we might assume that Chao Gardens might return someday, but they never did.
Did you know the galaxy in the Super Mario Galaxy logo is actually the Andromeda Galaxy? In 2020, Twitter user Comet Medal discovered the original picture of space used for the logo. Instead of making new art for it, Nintendo used a picture taken by Robert Gendler of the Andromeda Galaxy, the Milky Way's closest neighbor. One of the most loved aspects of Mario Galaxy ended up being the character of Rosalina. Adding a new character to the Mario lore was something the game's director, Yoshiaki Koizumi, was very passionate about. Since starting at Nintendo, Koizumi has always tried to add more story elements to the Zelda and Mario franchises, and he's often at odds with the series creator Shigeru Miyamoto. While Miyamoto calls for a minimalist story and focuses on the core gameplay, Koizumi, who studied film, wants to enrich the worlds with storytelling to create a memorable experience. In an interview with Wired, Koizumi discussed this clash with Miyamoto, saying, "For a long time, it really felt like telling a story in a Mario game was something that wasn't allowed. But I felt in this case that the Lumas and Rosalina really needed a story to explain what they were doing out there and to give the players a deeper understanding of their presence." It was from this desire that Rosalina and her backstory were added to Super Mario Galaxy. Naturally, during development, Rosalina saw a number of revisions as the team tried to figure out the best way to incorporate the character and her story. Some ideas for the storybook were scrapped, but were reworked into the main game. Another interesting fact is that at one point, Koizumi suggested he wanted the storybook to be sold as an actual children's book. Another thing that developed over time is Rosalina's appearance. We already covered some changes to Rosalina's design in an earlier video, but new information has come to light. Originally, Rosalina wasn't always going to dwarf Mario in size. When Nintendo EAD manager Hideki Kono saw Rosalina, he felt she should be taller. Speaking to Nintendo Dream, Kono recounted the experience, saying, "When Mario Galaxy was in production, I offered my advice. I wanted to include Rosalina in Mario Kart, but her body type was very similar to other characters. So I asked them if they could make her a bit taller. I told them, after all, Nintendo might use Rosalina in other games in the future. Partly because of her height, Rosalina would become a heavyweight class racer when she debuted in Mario Kart Wii, separating her from the other characters and becoming the only female racer in that weight class in the game." When it became time to work on Super Mario Galaxy 2, Koizumi and Miyamoto would clash again. Despite being a numbered sequel to the first game, Galaxy 2 is not a continuation of the events from the first game, and instead retells the events of the first game. In an interview with Wired, when talking about the role of the story in Galaxy 2, Miyamoto stated, "Well, I put a stop to that at the beginning this time," and punched his fists in the air. Many reviews were disappointed by Galaxy 2's lack of story. But Koizumi and Miyamoto would find their balance 7 years later with the release of Super Mario Odyssey for the Nintendo Switch, which featured more story elements than Galaxy 2. Within the E3 demo of Super Mario Galaxy, there are a number of differences from the final game. The Wii Remote originally had more functionality, being able to swipe away projectiles such as the fireballs that King Caliente shoots out. King Caliente's boss fight was reworked considerably, with the final game being a lot easier than the demo. In fact, when Mario Galaxy first began development, development, the team experimented with using more motion and pointer controls to move Mario, using the still-in-development Wii Remote. However, they felt like it wouldn't be a Mario game if you're not controlling Mario moving around, so they went back to a more standard control scheme. Another difference in the game was the music that plays when Mario collects a Power Star. Originally, the game played an orchestrated rendition of the flagpole theme from Super Mario Bros. The look of the Toads was also different. In the demo, they had a star pattern on them, which was removed in the final game. Toads could also transform from bunnies, while in the final version, bunnies only transform into Lumas. Speaking of music, the Toy Time Galaxy theme appears to be based on the track Mario Syndrome. This was an alternative dance remix of the Super Mario Bros. Overworld theme by Japanese act Bonus 21, which released as a 12-inch vinyl and cassette single in 1986. The Toy Time Galaxy theme features similar instrumentation and compositional choices as Mario Syndrome, though forego some of the 1986 song's dance elements. In the original Galaxy, there's an unused mushroom file. Bizarrely, removing the file will cause the game to crash instantly upon loading. This is because even though the file is technically unused, the game still checks for it. In the 3D All-Stars release, the mushroom file was removed and the error was fixed. For 3D All-Stars, Nintendo actually recompiled Galaxy's code for the Switch instead of emulating it. They also removed several pieces of unused data and files, and the Mii data, which was used in the Wii version. Some leftover data from Sunshine can be found in Super Mario Galaxy on the Wii, including a Fruits Boat, which, funnily enough, also went unused in Sunshine as well. Although there's plenty of unused functions in the game's code, programming for several enemies can be hacked back into the game. Parameters for Boo to contain a Goomba within it exist, meaning the player would have to kill 2 enemies instead of 1. Boos can also hold Lumas, Toads, and even different types of stars besides the Power Stars. There's also a dummy NPC with 2 animations, which was likely used just for testing. And a character named Tighe is an elderly Luma who would have had some dialogue, but was removed. Several planets were also removed or altered during the game's development. Speaking to Nintendo Dream, Miyamoto remarked that since Super Mario Galaxy relied on having multiple planets, balancing the game was easier, as planets could be added or removed to make sections of the game longer or shorter as needed. The planetoid named Water Road Cave Planet is the low polygon version of the Sand Spiral Galaxy. This suggests that instead of sand, the galaxy would have prominently featured water, but was changed. During early development, Super Mario Galaxy's levels were much darker. Since the game takes place in space, many of the game's skyboxes were darker or entirely black. Miyamoto asked the team to include blue skies so it wouldn't be too drastic of a change from other Mario titles. One idea that didn't come from Miyamoto, however, was the idea to add Luigi. The team at Tokyo added Luigi to the game during some experimentation. After seeing Luigi playable in the game, Miyamoto advised them to include the brother as a bonus for those who collected the game's 120 stars. The original Mario Galaxy released in 2007, but it took over a decade to be officially released in China on the Nvidia Shield. Having such a delayed release in China wasn't always the plan, however. In 2007, it was announced that an iQue version of the Wii was planned for sale in China in 2008, but the console was later cancelled in the region. During this brief planning period, it seems Galaxy was fully localized for China. Evidence for this can be seen for the Nvidia Shield version of Galaxy, where iQue appears in the game's credits. Within this localization for the Chinese market, one line from Kamek was changed drastically. In English, Kamek tells Mario to enjoy his flight, while in the Chinese version, Kamek tells Mario to go to hell. Other boss characters in the Galaxy games have plenty of interesting secrets surrounding them. The Magikoopa Kamela has a secret that's in all versions of the game. Kamela's wand has a reflection effect on it, not seen on any other object in the game. If the player looks closely at the jewel on the end of it, they can see that the reflection's texture is actually the Nintendo GameCube logo. Within Galaxy 2's Throwback Galaxy, the player can fight the Whomp King. The boss actually has a special goofy face texture for when he's defeated, but because he's laying down on his front when he's beaten, it's impossible to properly see the texture. One major villain also has an inconsistency across Galaxy 1 and 2. Bowser Jr.'s teeth in the first Galaxy have 2 fangs instead of 1. This is despite the official render of Bowser Jr. showing him with just 1 fang-like tooth. This mistake was fixed in Galaxy 2. For some reason, the Tarantox boss had its gender changed in the Spanish game. In most versions of Galaxy, the Tarantox is named some variation of Spider King, but in the Spanish release, the boss is called Reina Araña, which means Spider Queen. Another interesting boss name change appears in the English release. Baron Brr is called something along the lines of Ice King in most other regions. Although the English name may just be for the sake of alliteration, some believe it might be a nod to one of the earliest American vice presidents, Aaron Burr. The Top Maniac boss went through a fair amount of changes from when it was first shown. Not only was it said to appear in a different galaxy originally, it also had a different appearance, looking more similar to a regular spinning top enemy.
Did you know? Aaron, Lyron, and Agron are partly based on a mythical creature prominently featured in Korean fables. This beast, known as the Bulgasari, would eat iron and grow from the size of a bug to the size of a house, causing havoc. The Agron line of Pokemon reflects this. Aron's Pokedex entry in Pokemon Ruby states, to make its body, Aron feeds from iron ore that it digs from mountains. Aron is also small, being only about a foot tall, and ultimately evolves into the almost 7-foot tall Agron. Although these Pokemon are inspired by the myth, Agron's design might be directly based on a theatrical depiction of the monster. Bulgasari is a 1985 movie made in North Korea. The film shows the titular creature creating destruction after being summoned by an imprisoned blacksmith. Bulgasari in the movie is a giant beast with horns on its head, plating on its shoulders, and a thick sweeping tail, just like Agron. What's also interesting about the movie is that it was produced by Kim Jong-il, the former dictator of North Korea. Kim actually kidnapped the director of the movie and his wife and forced them to make the movie alongside several others. It wasn't until after making 7 films for Kim that the two managed to escape. Although nowhere near as extreme as Bulgasari's production, the development for Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire also had its issues. The shift from Game Boy to Game Boy Advance presented some problems for Pokemon's developers. While the Advance brought new possibilities to Game Freak, those possibilities also came with greater resource costs compared to the previous games. To lessen the workload, Ruby and Sapphire retained the simple art style of the Game Boy games. If the world became more realistic, it would mean more detailed, time-consuming art would have to be made. The backgrounds for the battle screens were kept simple as well. If the battle areas were over-detailed, they would resemble specific locations in the overworld rather than a generic theme. By making them vague, the team could also use them in a wide range of locations rather than specific spots on the map. An increased workload wasn't the only problem the games faced. At the beginning of development, the series' public perception was at an all-time low, with many denouncing Pokemon as a fad or anticipating a sharp decline in popularity. Junichi Masuda, Ruby and Sapphire's director, even recalled seeing large amounts of Pokemon products disappearing from toy stores and being replaced with the latest Star Wars figures. The pressure of seeing this actually gave Masuda health issues, and he needed a gastroscopy due to stress-related stomach pains. Nevertheless, he resolved to prove the critics wrong and continue the series. Masuda planned for Ruby and Sapphire to be the launching point for the next few games in the series. He always intended to follow it up with a 4th generation and hoped to be able to remake the original games in between so that players could transfer older Pokemon to the new games. Masuda's plan was instantly at risk after discovering the titles Ruby and Sapphire might be unavailable due to copyright issues. The region of Hoenn was based on Kyushu, the southernmost major island of Japan. Masuda's grandparents lived in Kyushu, and he created Hoenn in an attempt to recapture many of his experiences vacationing there. A lot of this time was spent fishing and hunting for insects, just as the player does in Pokemon. Masuda even snuck in one of his family members as a cameo. Kiri is a girl in Sidopolis who will give the player 2 berries daily. The character is named after Masuda's daughter, who was born as Ruby and Sapphire neared completion. There was only debugging work left to do at the time of her birth, so it would have been risky to implement a new character. Nevertheless, Masuda secretly programmed the character into the game. Although Masuda would have some fun developing the game, the lingering pressure would still affect him. The day before the game's release, Masuda had nightmares about it failing. The art team got the inspiration for many of the new Pokemon from animal encyclopedias, their own childhood experience, as well as cartoons and movies. These Pokemon were designed with a more unique look than in previous generations, but without overstepping boundaries or betraying Pokemon's design philosophy. Ruby and Sapphire included only 202 of the total 386 Pokemon. Choosing this number was difficult, as the developers had to balance the creature variety against the difficulty of completing the Pokédex. They also had to strike a balance between introducing new creatures and including enough old favorites to satisfy fans. Another issue was that every time they'd create a new, strong Pokemon, they'd need to create a counter for it as well. The team were also wary of making the new Pokemon overpowered, as that might encourage players to use only a single member of their team. Concept art for Ruby and Sapphire show different designs for Torchic, Trico, and Groudon, as well as a strange Pokemon that appears to be a combination of Latias and Blaziken. Other ideas that didn't stick include a feature where a Pokemon would make a different cry depending on its state. A healthy Pokemon would make a happy cry, where a sad Pokemon would sound different, but this idea had to be dropped due to memory restrictions. Game Freak considered changing core conventions of the series, such as the number of Pokemon players could have in their party, and the number of moves each Pokemon could learn. After some experimentation, they decided to stick with the original mechanics, as changing them didn't make the games more fun. Ruby and Sapphire's internal list of Pokemon is in a completely different order than the final Pokédex. It seems that Chimiko was a late addition to the games, as it's the final creature to appear on the list, even after the legendaries. There's also evidence that double battles against wild Pokemon were planned to be in the game, as the feature is referenced by a string of text in the game's files. Wild double battles would eventually be featured in later games in the franchise. Ruby and Sapphire were also planned to have additional weather effects for the overworld, including a unique snow effect, suggesting the game was planned to have a snowy area. This is further supported by an unused type of trainer called Boarder, whom were likely snowboarders. Tracks from Pokemon Gold and Silver can also be found on the cartridge, which are remixed using Ruby and Sapphire's sound font. However, it is possible that they were just used to test the game's audio. This seems to be a tradition in the series, as Diamond and Pearl also include a remix of the Ruby and Sapphire title theme in their files. The games also have several regional differences. Ruby and Sapphire have 3 decorative dolls based on Regirock, Regice, and Registeel that can only be obtained through the use of the GBA's e-reader peripheral. The e-reader cards for these dolls were only released in Japan, making them elusive in the West. The Japanese versions of Ruby and Sapphire also contain some minor issues and glitches that were fixed in other versions. While riding the acrobike along the beach in the Japanese versions, it's possible for players to bring up the option to surf. By doing so, the player is able to surf on land, which can only be undone by entering a building. In the beginning of Ruby and Sapphire, the player character's family moves into a new house with the help of a few Machoke. In the Emerald version, these Pokemon were changed to Vigoroth, but developers mistakenly still used Machoke's cry in the Japanese version. Not all of the game's glitches could be fixed for the international versions. In Ruby and Sapphire, anytime the player attempts to sell 256 or more of an item, no matter how much money the game says is being paid out, the actual amount will be 0. This means if the player attempts to sell 257 berries, for example, the amount will roll over and they'll only be paid for 1 berry. Speaking of berries, Ruby and Sapphire possesses the honor of having the first glitch in the series to be fixed via an official update. Due to an error with the game's internal clock, daily events such as gifts from NPCs or the growth of berries on trees will simply stop. The clock keeps track of the year, month, day, hour, minute, and second, but the years, months, and days are converted into a single day counter. The year, month, day conversion function has a flaw, however, and years are only counted after the first year has ended. So, after a year of play, the counter goes back to 0. Because berries are programmed to grow according to the amount on the day counter, if the player planted any berries on the last day of the year, the game won't make the berries grow any further until the counter reaches the same value when the seeds were planted, which takes another entire year. This is infamously known as the berry glitch, due to the fact that most players notice it when the berries stop growing on trees. The glitch was a big enough problem that Nintendo issued an update specifically to fix it. There were several ways for players to receive this update. In Pokemon Fire Red, Leaf Green, and Emerald, holding down both the Select and B buttons on the title screen will allow the update to be transferred to a copy of Ruby or Sapphire through a link cable. Connecting the games to Pokemon Coliseum, Pokemon Box, or PAL builds of Pokemon Channel will download download the update automatically. Certain Nintendo GameCube demo kiosks also came with an option to download the update to a connected copy of Ruby or Sapphire. If the player opted to go through the kiosk option, they'd be gifted a shiny Zigzagoon. And lastly, if none of these options were available to the player, they could simply mail their copy of the game to Nintendo, who would update their game and send it back.
Did you know? The Minish are likely based on a race of tiny humans from Ainu folklore known as the Koropok Guru. Like the Minish, these beings are often portrayed as carrying leaves and as small as thumbs. It's also possible that Minish Cap's developers took inspiration from European folklore. The Minish that live in towns behave very similarly to the brownies of British legend and similar European tales. Brownies are said to help with household tasks and try to please people in exchange for gifts, but hate being seen. These same traits can be seen in the Minish, although they seem to act more selflessly. At one point in the game, the Minish help the shoemaker Rem finish the Pegasus boots as he sleeps. This plot point is based on the brothers Grimm tale, The Elves and the Shoemaker. In the tale, a poor shoemaker repeatedly buys leather, goes to bed, then wakes up to a finished pair of shoes in the morning, which he sells for a high price. He eventually finds that elves have been making the shoes for him at night. The shoemaker and his wife then decide to make clothes for the elves to thank them, but this gesture frees the elves of their servitude, and the shoemaker never sees them again. The Minish race inspired other Zelda games and led to the creation of a new race that was cut from The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. The game's director Hidemaru Fujibayashi explained, "Since Breath of the Wild is a 3D game, we could have all these tiny-sized towns, and Link himself could shrink, but with all these other characters that stand out, we thought it would be difficult for these little guys to live out their own place in the game. So we really wanted to have them in there for the gameplay, but sadly had to give up on the idea." The idea to make Link change sizes in Minish Cap came from the team at Capcom wanting to keep in line with Zelda tradition. Zelda games often have Link go between two worlds, such as a light and a dark world, or the past and the future. A contrast between big and small was chosen early in development, and this concept guided the title's production. Capcom took a different approach when developing the game, however, and made copious amounts of concept art. Nintendo usually make far less, and opt to create game assets from scratch to save time. Although the game seems to take cues from the Wind Waker and uses many of its characters, the world of the Minish Cap was designed to have its own unique identity. Developers then decided to bring in residents from Wind Waker that fit Minish Cap's atmosphere and made them part of the world. The Minish Cap is one of the only games in the Zelda series to be released in Europe before the United States. This was due to the launch of the Nintendo DS, which came out in December of 2004 in the US. Nintendo of America delayed the release of Minish Cap so that the two products weren't competing with each other. Conversely, the DS wouldn't launch in Europe until 2005, and Nintendo of Europe wanted to push the Minish Cap as a major release for the holiday season. The Minish Cap was also available in Europe as part of a limited edition release that included a special Zelda-themed Game Boy Advance SP. Out of all of the limited edition packages produced, 6 of them contained a special golden ticket. Anybody who found one of these tickets would receive a 24-karat gold-plated Game Boy Advance SP. Only 7 of these systems were made. 6 were given to golden ticket holders, and the 7th was given away as part of a magazine promotion. As a side effect of its early release, the European version of Minish Cap is actually an earlier build of the game, and contains several glitches not found in other versions. If the player tries to fuse kinstones with the character Eni, then cancels and leaves the screen, they'll be unable to fuse kinstones with him again. This makes one of the game's side quests impossible to complete. Another example is if the player uses the boomerang or bow immediately after lighting the lantern. This will allow them to perform several tricks, such as levitating in midair or shooting double arrows. Some regional differences also hint at unused content. The description for the Ice Wizrobe figurine in the European game says, "They're weak against fire, so hit them with your fire rod." There's no fire rod in the final game. However, there is a fire rod in the game's data. Graphics, text, and even some functionality for the fire rod are still in the game. Because the fire rod is similar in function to the lantern, it's believed the lantern replaced the rod towards the end of the game's production. The game also has a crudely drawn unused character that wears only a cape, hat, and trunks. The character was most likely used for testing purposes early in development. 3 items used to debug the game still exist within its data. They're named Cell Overwrite Set, Enemy Set, and Mega Crush. Only Cell Overwrite Set is still functional, and lets the player copy and paste surrounding tiles and edit the environment. Some of the Minish Cap's unused content also references other games. There are 3 unused stained glass windows. These were originally meant to be part of Hyrule Castle and depict Valu, Jabun, and the Great Deku Tree from Wind Waker. Similarly, the 3 Goddess Pearls from Wind Waker also exist within the game, but are left unused. It's unclear whether they would have played a significant role in the game. Zols, Gels, and Potabus from the Legend of Zelda 4 Swords also exist in the Code of Minish Cap. By hacking, the Zols and Gels can be spawned in one of 3 colors, and the Potabu can be modified to split into a different number of mini Potabus when hit. There's an interesting secret in the Caster Wilds area that can't be seen under normal circumstances. Outside of the playable area of the cave, there's Japanese text that says Mogura, which means mole. Considering the cave needs to be dug out, this writing seems to be a reference to the mole mitts item. There are additional references that made it into the game. The mushroom-like puffstool enemy shares its name with a similar-looking creature from the Pikmin games. However, these enemies do not share a name in the Japanese versions of their respective games. This means either the localization team wanted to add in a nod to Pikmin, or they reused the same name by accident. Another possible reference is that Vati's laugh seems to be a shortened version of the Happy Mask Salesman's laugh from Majora's Mask.
Did you know? Development of Wii Sports began before the Wii console even had a finalized design. A small team of programmers were given prototype controllers and told to develop tech demos to show off the new motion controls. This team included director of Wii Sports Tennis, Keizo Ota. Using the prototype Wii controller as a tennis racket was one of the first ideas the team had. The idea worked so well that Nintendo decided to produce a full game based on the concept, and the team came up with several game-worthy ideas as they developed it. Shigeru Miyamoto divided the ideas into 2 categories, games based on sports and games for the whole family. The sports games were bundled into Wii Sports, while the family games were used in Wii Play. Initially, Wii Sports was only going to include 3 mini-games: tennis, golf, and baseball. Nintendo felt this collection offered a good variety of content. However, baseball isn't very popular in Europe, and the developers realized players there might only be interested in tennis and golf. To compensate, Nintendo decided to add just one more sport and had to decide between bowling or boxing. Bowling appealed to a demographic of people who didn't usually play video games, but boxing was a great example of how the nunchuck could be used. In the end, they included both. While working on the original Wii Sports, Nintendo snuck in a few nods to earlier games. One notable reference is that in the golf game, all of the levels are remakes of courses featured in Golf on the original NES. The main team for Wii Sports didn't include a graphic designer, so one of the major hurdles they faced was coming up with playable characters. In an Iwata Asks interview, Oda stated, "We tried using Mario as a character once, but then it didn't feel like we were the ones playing anymore. It felt like Mario was actually the one playing and we were just controlling him. But when we used simple models, it actually felt like we were the ones in the game." This gave the developers the idea of using character models that looked like the players themselves. Originally, the developers wanted players to import digital photos of themselves from an SD card and copy their faces onto their character through the game. This process proved to be too complicated for people who weren't familiar with the technology, and Nintendo wanted the game to be accessible to as many people as possible. Around this time, Miyamoto showed the developers prototype software that made simplistic caricatures based on Japanese kokeshi dolls. The Wii Sports team fell in love with the designs and decided to use the character creator in Wii Sports. But while developing the software, they realized the idea had potential beyond Wii Sports. This gave birth to the Wii's Mii channel and led to Mii characters being used in a variety of games. Since its release, Wii Sports has officially become the best-selling console game of all time. While this is largely due to it being bundled with the Wii system in most parts of the world, the game was sold separately in Japan and still managed to become the best-selling Wii game in the region. To date, Wii Sports has sold around 83 million copies worldwide. To put this in perspective, Wii Sports alone accounts for roughly 10% of all Wii software sales. Because of its popularity, the game received widespread attention in pop culture and was featured on sitcoms, late-night talk shows, Hollywood movies, and the 80th Annual Academy Awards. This runaway popularity hasn't always been a good thing, however. In March of 2009, a group of detectives investigated a home as part of a drug raid. At the scene, they found illegal substances, weapons, and other incriminating evidence. Even though the bust was successful, the detectives later landed in hot water when security footage caught them playing bowling on the suspect's copy of Wii Sports during the hours following the raid. Outside of recreational gaming, Wii Sports has also been used for medical purposes. In 2007, boxer Albert Leah sustained serious brain damage during a match, leaving him confined to a wheelchair. Doctors at Glenrose Rehabilitation Hospital in Edmonton, Canada, incorporated Wii Sports boxing as part of his physical therapy regimen. Leah regained full use of his legs just months later. Similarly, in Landstuhl, Germany, doctors used Wii Sports to help treat wounded military veterans. In fact, the game was used in hospitals all over the world to help patients suffering from strokes and spinal cord injuries, as well as in retirement homes. Wii Sports has proven to be immensely popular with older players. The world record for most perfect games played in Wii Sports bowling is held by John Bates, who claimed the record in 2011 at the age of 85. To date, he has bowled 20,000 perfect games, all of which he recorded in his own home. Although Wii Sports eventually got a sequel in the form of Wii Sports Resort, former Nintendo president Satoru Iwata was initially hesitant. He felt creating a sequel would be taking the easy route and wanted to focus more on creating new and original games. But when the Wii Motion Plus attachment was announced, Wii Sports Resort was created to show off its enhanced motion controls. In Resort, developers wanted to avoid reusing games from Wii Sports, so they considered alternatives such as marine and winter sports. Eventually, they decided to base the game around a resort feel, which influenced the selection of activities in the final game. One of their ideas was a game based around the Japanese kendama toy, but it was scrapped because it didn't fit the theme. Fishing and water slide games also failed to make the cut. Wii Sports Resort was originally not going to include golf either. However, during an interview while developing the game, Miyamoto mentioned that golf swings would now be determined by the player's backswing. When Miyamoto visited the team after the interview, he told them, "You know, we're including golf now." Golf was effectively included because of Miyamoto's slip-up during the interview. Wii Sports Resort was meant to be the start of a new franchise, though not in the way you might think. The island in the game, Woohoo Island, was envisioned as the star of an entire series of games based on an idea Miyamoto had been toying with for 10 years. In theory, the series would include titles across different genres, including adventure games, simulation games, and RPGs, all set on Woohoo Island. Over the course of these games, players would become acquainted with the layout of the island until it felt like a familiar neighborhood. Ultimately, Miyamoto hoped Woohoo Island would become an iconic Nintendo staple in its own right, on the level of Mario or The Legend of Zelda.
Did you know? In Animal Crossing New Leaf at exactly 3:30 a.m. on Sunday and Monday, the regular TV static is interrupted by a message from aliens. Another show can be seen at 6:30 a.m. that shows people exercising. This actually references Japanese culture and is a nod to Raijo Taiso. The broadcast is essentially an exercise program shown every morning in Japan and aims to keep the nation healthy. New Leaf has several unused concepts. While developing ideas to distinguish New Leaf from previous games, the team considered adding a new tool allowing players to pan for gold. The concept of having the player take on the role of the town's mayor actually wasn't introduced until about a year into development. The team already decided that the game's focus would be allowing a player to customize the entire town, but when they were asked to pitch the game to Nintendo veterans Shigeru Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka, they realized they needed a better way to summarize their concept. To explain the player's expanded influence over the town, the team made them the mayor. There's an interesting leftover that's hinted at while choosing the location for a public works project. If the player talks to Isabelle about the projects after forcing her into the beach area, she'll advise that the location is too close to the ocean. Normally, Isabelle stops the player before they reach the beach, so this dialogue may suggest that it was once planned to build public works projects on the beach. There's more interesting secrets that can't normally be seen. The computer monitor in the mayor's office is normally out of view due to the fixed camera angle. Unlocking the camera reveals that it actually displays an image of the town's previous mayor, Tortimer. Moving the camera also reveals a small trick by developers present in every main Animal Crossing game. Zooming out or rotating the camera reveals the game's world is generated in a literal cone shape. Animal Crossing Happy Home Designer allows players to fully customize their homes. This was inspired by the team's own experiences making villager homes for this series. Series producer Aya Kyogoku told GamesBeat about the process of designing villager homes, saying, "We had to think about what kind of things would this animal like? What kind of life do they lead? Trying to figure out what they'd want was very fun, and we tried to think of a way we could get this kind of experience to players as well." The team experimented with giving the player a budget for decorating their home, but they felt this limited creativity and the idea was scrapped. Animal Crossing Wild World contains a particularly problematic type of item hidden in its data. The items, referred to as seeds, take effect when dropped from the player's inventory and spawn landscape features, such as trees, houses, and even villagers. Any changes made with the seeds will become permanent once the player saves. Seeds are used by the game to generate town layouts and can only be accessed by players through the use of cheat devices like Action Replay. While many players made use of seeds to customize their towns, some malicious players used them while visiting other towns over Wi-Fi to render areas inaccessible. At worst, they would spawn so many objects that the host's game would crash as soon as it loaded the title screen, rendering their save data totally unplayable. Wild World's sequel, Animal Crossing City Folk, was intended to include several new features and changes that ultimately didn't make the cut. When discussing how to make an Animal Crossing game for the Wii, the development team wondered if the game's characters should be replaced by Miis. This was done early on as an experiment, but the end result came across as strange and unpleasant, and the idea was dropped. Aya Kyogoku, who would go on to direct, wanted to take advantage of Wii Connect 24 by including a feature where players could visit their friends' towns even if they weren't there. Technical issues made this impossible to achieve in City Folk, but the concept was brought back in New Leaf as the Dream Suite. There are also several special Nintendo-themed items that were meant to be available through the City Folk's point system, but for unknown reasons were never used. They would later be brought back in New Leaf. In the original Animal Crossing, there's an unused squirrel villager that fans have nicknamed Blazel, due to looking like a cross between the characters Bliss and Hazel. The only dialogue Blazel is programmed with is one of Captain's lines, and if they're hacked into the game, they'll recite random villager dialogue. For reasons unknown, Blazel is grouped with the game's special non-playable characters in the game's data. Porter, the monkey who works at the train station, is based on a Japanese song called The Monkey Palanquin Carrier. Two other characters with Japanese connections are Gracie and Sahara. In the West, these characters are both female. In Japan, however, they're male, and named Grace and Roland. Isabelle, the player's secretary in New Leaf, is named Shizu in Japan, which appears to be a pun on the fact that Isabelle is a Shih Tzu breed of dog. KK Slider, known as Totaka-K in Japan, is said to be based on series music composer Kazumi Totaka. Totaka has left a 19-note tune named Totaka's Song in many of the games he's worked on, including Animal Crossing titles. The song appears in every game as KK Song, a special tune that KK Slider will play upon request. Totaka's Song is also featured as the background music for the Who's Done It e-reader minigame. In City Folk, if the player waits long enough in Captain's cab to the city, the song is one of several that Captain will whistle. Similarly, in New Leaf, if the player spends several minutes riding the boat to Tortimer Island, Captain will whistle Totaka's Song, though this is only possible if there's a severe amount of lag, making it difficult to encounter. Perhaps the most obscure place where Totaka's Song has been hidden is on the official European microsite for New Leaf, where clicking on the picture of KK Slider in the background will cause the song to play. The chords and rhythm of the songs performed by KK Slider seem to be tailored for a guitar. Though this might seem obvious, it has some complicated implications. MIDI music is usually composed on a keyboard and edited in software, or composed directly into a computer with software. It's highly unlikely that Totaka had custom hardware and software connecting a guitar to his computer. Because of this, it seems that KK's songs were composed on guitar first, or at least composed to mimic how they would sound on guitar. The music even has notes offset slightly before and after each other to mimic the movement of a hand strumming over guitar strings. Another interesting observation is that KK Slider has only 3 fingers, but some of the chords in his songs require 4 fingers. This means they could be potentially impossible for a 3-fingered animal to play. Animal Crossing was originally developed for the Nintendo 64's DD add-on. When the 64DD ultimately proved to be a failure, the project was retooled and released as a standard N64 game titled Dobutsu no Mori, or Animal Forest. However, a few things had to be changed during the transition. The game was intended to make use of the 64DD's internal clock, allowing the game world to change in real time. Because the basic N64 lacked this feature, Animal Forest included a battery-powered clock built into the cartridge itself. Animal Forest was eventually ported to the GameCube as Animal Forest Plus, which was released internationally as Animal Crossing. The game was rolled out in some form or another in most regions between 2001 and 2004. However, it wouldn't see a release in China until 2006, when the original Animal Forest was released for the iQ player. The iQ was a Chinese video game console that could play select N64 games available for download via PC or special kiosks. Only 14 games were ever brought to the system, and the service was discontinued in late 2016. Before Animal Crossing released in the West, the localization team had to change or remove many elements that were too specific to Japanese culture. To compensate for the cut events, 16 new holidays were added, including Groundhog's Day, Valentine's Day, April Fool's Day, Halloween, and Toy Day, which parallels Christmas. Following the success of Animal Crossing, Nintendo released another enhanced port exclusively in Japan titled Animal Forest E+. This version retained the extra content in Animal Crossing while also adding many new features. Though a number of E+'s features were passed on to future titles in the series, some remained exclusive to E+ for years. For example, E+ expanded on the e-reader functionality introduced in Animal Crossing. By scanning the corresponding cards, players could choose which neighbors moved into their town. This feature wouldn't resurface until the release of the Welcome Amiibo update for New Leaf in 2016. Players could also hire Tom Nook to build objects, such as street lamps and a water mill to decorate the town. Several of these objects would eventually return as public works projects in New Leaf. E+ also contains a couple of exclusive hidden features. If the player visits Tom Nook's shop after hours and hits the door with a shovel 3 times, they'll be greeted by a sleepy Tom Nook dressed in his pajamas. The player will only be allowed to buy the items on display, and everything will be sold at a significantly higher price. Should the player encounter Mr. Rossetti 6 times in the original Animal Crossing, he'll order them to repeat what he says by typing it out. The player can trigger an Easter egg by instead typing in certain phrases such as dirtbag, butthead, bite me, I hate you, moles suck, and die. Doing so will make Mr. Rossetti even angrier, and he'll tell the player they should be ashamed of themselves. While Mr. Rossetti's tirades are a staple of the franchise, they prove to be too intense for some players. In an Iwata Asks interview, former president of Nintendo Satoru Iwata mentioned, Mr. Rossetti's abrasive tone actually made some young girls cry. When the creator of Animal Crossing, Katsuya Eguchi, started working at Nintendo, he had to move more than 300 miles away from his friends and family. In an interview with Edge magazine, Eguchi said, Animal Crossing features 3 themes: family, friendship, and community. But the reason I wanted to investigate them was the result of being so lonely when I arrived in Kyoto. When I moved there, I left my family and friends behind. In doing so, I realized that being close to them, being able to spend time with them, talk to them, play with them, was such a great and important thing, and that was the impetus behind the original Animal Crossing. He also explained that he wanted to design a game he could share with his family, even when they weren't able to play together. This isn't the only part of Animal Crossing that's been influenced by a developer's family life. According to director Hisashi Nogami, Animal Crossing Wild World was particularly popular with the family of fellow Nintendo designer Hideki Kono. Kono's wife spent a great deal of time in the game fishing, much to her son's annoyance. When her son would play the game, the town's villagers commented that she does nothing but go fishing. This interaction served as an inspiration for the Wii Connect 24 features in Animal Crossing City Folk.
When the original Gold and Silver released in 1999, Game Freak said they didn't feel fully complete, not even close. Series creator Satoshi Tajiri looked ahead to the future and prognosticated, saying, I'm thinking that the best Pokemon game will be released sooner rather than later, but whether or not it'll be the best Pokemon game is something I can't achieve on my own. From here on out, kids who grew up playing may grow up to be game developers, right? And if those kids have the same vision as us, then I definitely think it's possible to expand the world of Pokemon by working together with them. Tajiri's prediction came true. At sunup the day Gold and Silver released in Japan, a young Takao Uno was in line at the store waiting to buy them. 10 years later, he was art director for those games' remakes. Game Freak made Fire Red and Leaf Green in just over a year, but went all out and spent 3 years on Heart Gold and Soul Silver. With the highest review scores in the entire franchise, you could say these are the best Pokemon games that Tajiri predicted. Not bad, considering they were made by a team of just a dozen guys. In this video, we're going to translate some old Japanese magazines and websites to find new information about Heart Gold and Soul Silver, go behind the scenes, and see how Game Freak pulled it off. For preservation's sake, we'll publicly archive every interview translation we did for this video, so you can read them in full, linked in this video's description. The love put into Heart Gold and Soul Silver smacks you in the face as soon as you walk out your front door. In the original New Bark town, there's a sign that says, "The town where winds of a new beginning blow." But you kinda had to use your imagination, because there wasn't any wind. And most kids probably never even took the time to read the sign. In one of these Japanese magazines, Takao Uno says he did read it, and it made a huge impression on him. So for the remakes, he added some windmills and actual wind. So New Barktown lived up to the promise of that 10-year-old sign. He said, "As a fan myself, I made these games something I would want to play. I worked to make the gold and silver I remembered from the Game Boy era a wider, more vibrant, and more fun world. So I hope you'll enjoy exploring it side by side with your favorite Pokemon." Speaking of exploring side by side, you could say that's why the remakes are called Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Walking Pokemon was director Shigeki Morimoto's idea, who said, "We considered a lot of options for the titles, and thought about things like how you can walk around with Pokemon, and the relationship between Ho-Oh and Lugia. We concluded that a major theme of these games is sharing meaningful experiences with Pokemon, so we chose Heart and Soul to communicate that idea." There's a section in one of these magazines called The Secret Story of Walking with Pokemon. In the earlier Sinnoh games, you could only walk with Pokemon in one little area, not the entire game world. But Game Freak was determined to make it possible in Johto. They drew overworld sprites for all 493 Pokemon, plus gender differences and shinies, and added animations. Not just for walking, but also thousands of little reactions when you talk to them, or situations that only happen with certain Pokemon in specific locations. Making sure Pokemon didn't get caught up on weird terrain was especially tricky, and the whole initiative was arguably the most difficult part of the entire game's development. Takao Uno was speechless when Morimoto told him they were really gonna do it. Quote, "I was shocked, but it was our dream to let players walk through this wide world together with their Pokemon, so even though it was exhausting work, I just thought, it's gonna be worth it while I was drawing them. I thought, if it'll make the fans happy, I'll do it." After all, they did it with one Pokemon back in Yellow version. All the devs agreed, we can't lose to a 10-year-old Game Boy game. It was Nintendo who proposed the idea of letting players walk with their Pokemon in real life, by bundling every copy of Heart Gold and Soul Silver with a pedometer called the Pokewalker, which let fans transfer over their favorite monsters to take for walks and gain EXP. Pokemon Company president Ishihara actually wanted to try and sell 6 Pokewalkers to fans, so they'd have a full team just like a real Pokemon trainer. It's those kinds of ideas that made him the merchandise kingpin he is today, and earned him the nickname the King of Portable Toys. They ended up not pushing to have fans buy 6 of them, probably for the best, as it would have cost kids a small fortune. The Pokewalker's designer Shigeru Omori did carry 6 of them though. He was another one of Tajiri's predictions that came true. He said, "I was a student when I played Gold and Silver. It was interesting to work on a game that fascinated me 10 years ago. I wish for everyone to have the chance to find something that fascinates them at a young age so they can carry that passion into their adult life." For a lot of folks watching this video, we imagine that last part describes y'all's relationship with Pokemon to this very day. Even though Heart Gold and Soul Silver didn't introduce any brand new Pokemon, they did change a few old ones, in subtle ways you probably never even noticed. Ken Sugimori made all the original Gold and Silver artwork, and he returned to ink a new art set for the remakes. The most obvious change is his entire art style. Back in the old days, he said he was basically using watercolor to imitate Akira Toriyama's style. You know, the Dragon Ball guy. But as he got older, he didn't want to do that anymore, and moved on to something new. In a Nintendo Dream magazine we translated, they asked Sugimori about his philosophy for the remake's art set. He said he didn't want to make any big changes, cause that'd upset fans who loved a particular Pokemon since childhood, and would hate to see it suddenly look different. Quote, "Every Pokemon is somebody's favorite, and Pokemon belong to everyone, so I try not to change them too much. So the new artworks aren't so much remakes as they are remasters with subtle updates, like Meganium's flower, for example, and Stantler's tail, which was originally white but changed to brown. Gligar's claws and wing spikes aren't white anymore either, now they're pink. Scizzor's got 3 abdomen sternites when he originally only had 2, and Ursaring used to have 4 claws on each paw, but now he's got 5. Sugimori also changed the finger counts on Haunter and Mr. Mime a few years earlier. In our video covering the Kanto remakes, we talked about the Japanese taboo against 4-fingered characters, and how it's considered offensive to people who've lost fingers, like butchers and meat packers. About a dozen Johto Pokemon's poses were identical to 10 years earlier, but Sugimori explained why he changed the rest of them. He said, "There are some Pokemon poses that I've grown tired of seeing after 10 years and made changes to. But if I thought a pose looked as cool as it could get, I left it the way it was. An official illustration needs to be from a perspective that shows everything you need to know to understand a Pokemon, which can be very difficult. That said, I aimed to draw most Pokemon so you could see them from a fresh perspective. And of course, a lot of Pokemon colors look different, but we're mostly going to chalk that up to Sugimori's new art style." Speaking of different colors, there actually was one new Pokemon variant added in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, the time-traveling, female-only, spiky-eared Pichu. But she was originally going to be a white Pichu, which we know thanks to Shoko Nakagawa. She's a host of some Japanese TV shows like Pokemon Sunday, and also spiky-eared Pichu's voice actress. We bought Shoko's autobiography from Japan, where she reveals, quote, "Originally, spiky-eared Pichu was going to be white Pichu instead. And I heard they were even thinking about making a brand of white cream stew to go along with it and everything. But they eventually went with spiky-eared Pichu instead." The Japanese words for white Pichu and white stew are nearly identical. Howaito Pichu and Howaito Shichu. So the marketing would have written itself. As the largest media franchise in the world, the Pokemon company's always looking for new merchandising opportunities wherever they can get them. We also got a visual of white Pichu thanks to Shoko. In 2014, there was a Pokemon art exhibit in Tokyo, with strict rules against photography, but Shoko flaunted those rules and snapped this picture. It looks like Game Freak considered a few other variants as well, like Heart Cheek Pichu and Pichu with a bad haircut. They ended up picking spiky-eared Pichu, but you could say she's a lost Pokemon too, in her own way. She can travel through time with Celebi, but she can never be transferred off a Heart Gold or Soul Silver cartridge, so she'll always be stuck, forever, in the Johto remakes. Well, except she is in Smash Bros. Ultimate. Maybe she time-traveled a couple console generations into the future. The game's sound was another major focus, with Heart Gold and Soul Silver being the first in the series to include environmental sound effects. In these magazines, lead audio designer Go Ichinose says Johto'd feel lonely if the sound didn't live up to the new visuals, and recounted his struggles to make nature come alive all over Johto. What you're actually hearing are sound files ripped from the game's data. In normal play, you'd barely hear them over the game's music, which makes the effort all the more admirable. In a speech at the 2023 CDEC Developers Conference, Ichinose said adding all those environmental sounds was incredibly expensive because they all had to be placed in the overworld manually, tile by tile. To keep costs from getting completely out of control, he says they eventually had to give up on placing those kind of sounds with human hands, and switch to using procedural generation in later gens. That's a surprisingly interesting story all on its own, but it's pretty in-depth and really more relevant to Legends Arceus, so we'll save it for a future video. Boasting 270 tracks, Heart Gold and Soul Silver had a massive OST. A Super Music Collection CD was released physically in Japan. It did release internationally 5 years later, but only in a digital format as a $10 iTunes download. Ichinose said Johto has a strong Japanese motif, so they made its music also sound very Japanese. On the other hand, Sinnoh's music was a bit more mature and a bit cooler. And before that, he said Hoenn was hot, so the musical theme was that its music should be hot too. When Ichinose looked back on that gargantuan soundtrack, one track in particular stuck out in his memory. He said, "When I was making Lugia's battle theme, I looked at a ridiculous amount of artwork and videos, and thought about Lugia all day and dreamed about Lugia all night. At some point, I fell in love. It's my favorite Johto Pokemon. So was it worth dreaming about all day and night?" Here's what he ended up with. We'll let you be the judge. By the way, while we're rooting around in the game's files, we found this unused sound effect for Snorlax's snoring. And also some unused wind sounds. Oh yeah, and Heart Gold and Soul Silver's protagonist Ethan is a ninja, but only in the remakes. Ken Sugimori made the original Gen 2 protagonists Ethan and Chris to look pretty Western, but the new art director, Takao Uno, said he remade Ethan to look more Japanese in the remakes. In one of these magazine translations, he says, "We wanted to make him more Japanese, or rather, make him look kind of like a ninja." Someone asks if he actually is a ninja, and Uno says, "He sure is. He has the tapered pants and the tight clothes." Heart Gold and Soul Silver recreate Crystal version's content, so it's a bit strange that Crystal's female protagonist Chris is nowhere to be found in the new Johto. According to Uno, that was sort of an accident, because he started drawing the remake's female protagonist without thinking to look back at Sugimori's Gen 2 artwork. First and foremost, he designed her thinking she'd be walking with her Pokemon a lot, so he gave her good walking clothes, shorts and overalls, unlike Dawn in Diamond and Pearl who wears a skirt. The girl he ended up with looked nothing like Chris, so he just decided to name her Lyra and not try and say she's still the original character. That's why Chris got written out of the remakes, even though Ethan got to stick around. By the way, if you're wondering why Dawn wore a skirt in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, it's because Masuda wanted her that way. To quote him from one of these Japanese magazines, he says, "I really like skirts, so I insisted the female protagonist should wear one in Diamond and Pearl." Anyway, we'll get more into these Gen 4 translations in our next Sinnoh video.
Did you know? Instead of using a magical conductor's baton, Link was originally planned to control the wind using a theremin. This alien-sounding instrument was accidentally invented by a Soviet radio engineer in 1920. Leon Theremin was trying to make something else entirely, but ended up with the world's first major electronic instrument. Instead of touching it, the musician leaves their hands floating above it. One hand controls the frequency, and the other controls the amplitude. But how exactly did this almost get into a Zelda game? A movie about Leon Theremin had just come out in Japan, about how he invented the instrument, traveled the world playing it, became a Soviet spy, and got thrown in the gulags. And it turns out that a few Nintendo devs saw the movie and thought, "Hey, that's an interesting story. Let's have Link play a theremin in the next Zelda game." To control the instrument, players would have held their GameCube controller like this, with the analog and C sticks each representing one of Link's hands playing the theremin. The game's title comes from the primary instrument, so up until halfway into development, the theremin itself was the Wind Waker. This was all explained by the game's director Eiji Aonuma in a 2003 issue of Nintendo Dream we recently had translated, and they joke that the game could have been called The Legend of Zelda, The Wind Theremin. For this video, we delved into hundreds of magazines looking for cut content and obscure facts about the Wind Waker, and ended up translating several magazines and some online interviews into English for the first time. We want to keep going the extra mile to get new and interesting facts for you guys, and if you want to see more of it too, leave a like on this video. It really helps us out. So anyway, Aonuma and his team were all set with a Zelda game based around a theremin. Then Shigeru Miyamoto came in for playtesting and, as he tends to do, upended the tea table. According to Aonuma, he'd play what we made and point out what was weird. We had the Wind Waker item ready to some extent, when Miyamoto came to me shaking his head saying no, no, no. He talked about how it was entirely unacceptable. We were using both sticks at first, adjusting with both hands like how you play a theremin. By moving both hands like this, then the magazine notes that Aonuma aims his palms down and moves his hands up and down, you could change the sound. But eventually we changed it to the baton, and everything else fell into place from there. By the way, a big thanks to Daniel Romberger for making this demonstration for us, so we can see and hear a theremin in action. Check out his channel for more Nintendo remixes. Miyamoto also changed Wind Waker's difficulty. It was initially harder, but a lot of Ocarina and Majora players got stuck on bosses and never got to experience the full game. So, to make sure everyone could reach the ending, Miyamoto toned down the difficulty, especially the bosses, compared to how the Zelda team originally had it set. When the HD remaster released a decade later, they added Hero Mode to compensate. But Aonuma said, even though he's the director, this new mode was too hard even for him. He got stuck on Goma and gave up, then asked his team if the difficulty he was experiencing was some sort of bug, and they were like, no. Another aspect that Miyamoto wasn't keen on was Wind Waker's art style. Initially, Nintendo was just going to improve on the graphics from Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, and they even built a prototype in that style. But later on in the conceptual phase, the Zelda team's artist proposed Toon Link. The rest of the team loved it, and dove headfirst into the cel-shaded art style. Aonuma didn't think Miyamoto would like it, so he waited till they were already in pretty deep to show it to him. And he was right. Miyamoto literally cringed and didn't think it would sell. Aonuma recalls, "If I had gone and talked to him from the very beginning, I think he would have said, 'How is that Zelda?' Miyamoto had trouble letting go of the realistic Link art style until the very end. At some point, he had to give a presentation against his will. That's when he said something to me like, 'You know, it's not too late to change course and make a realistic Zelda.' But the team was super enthusiastic about the new style and insisted they didn't want to give it up. It was inspired by the anime they watched as kids, especially Hayao Miyazaki's Animal Treasure Island. And Aonuma says Wind Waker's kind of unique in the way it doesn't feel like a Zelda game. It's more of an adventure across the sea where the main character just happens to be Link. And for that reason, the story was also kept from Miyamoto for quite a long time. Miyamoto really wasn't thrilled with the situation, but ultimately accepted it because with the team they had, it would have taken 10 years to make a realistic Zelda, but a Toon Zelda could be made in a fraction of the time. But most other Zelda titles make you feel like you're Link, but in Wind Waker, the team tried to make it feel more like you're guiding Link, almost as if you're watching an anime. In other words, he's his own entity outside the player's inputs. This separation was emphasized with Link's eyes. He looks around independently of the player's actions and what the player sees. In early builds shown to the public, Link's eyes were solid black, but a fan from Europe sent in a letter saying black eyes made Europeans uncomfortable. In response, Miyamoto said, "His eyes would change between 7 different colors. We made it so his eyes were temporarily red in battle, then blue when he calms down, and green when he's talking to people, and things like that. But ultimately we realized a human with red eyes is kind of creepy, isn't it? So at that point, we just decided to give up on the idea." Ultimately, they looked at Mario's blue eyes and said, "Let's just make Link's eyes blue and call it a day." Fan letters continued pouring in, especially from girls asking to get rid of the Toon Link altogether. Lots of girls demanded in no uncertain terms that they bring back the stud from Ocarina, the teenage heartthrob they fell in love with 5 years earlier, but Nintendo ignored them. Wind Waker's timeline placement changed as well. Miyamoto said they initially placed it at the very beginning, before the other Zelda games, but shortly after release, Aonuma said they'd changed it to take place 100 years after Ocarina of Time, a fact reflected in the game's story. Probably the biggest changes in development were for the sea itself. According to Aonuma, "We wanted to do away with the Hyrule we'd had so far. We didn't want to just remake the same Hyrule from the N64, so what could we do? How about we just sync the whole thing? At first, we had plans for primary and alternate worlds like A Link to the Past, where you could go back and forth between present and past Hyrule, but we couldn't make something like that in the limited time we had. In A Link to the Past, you can warp back and forth between the Light World, where most of the game takes place, and a dark, twisted version of Hyrule called the Dark World. Wind Waker would have used a similar mechanic, but instead of the Dark World, Link would have explored underwater Hyrule. This concept art in the Hyrule Historia gives us a better look at how they were thinking that might have worked, with Link using a key item to warp down to the lower world. To get back to the upper world, Link would have grabbed onto hooks belonging to fishermen who'd yank him up back to the surface. Wind Waker spent 1 year in the planning stages, which gave them time to decide which parts of the Great Sea lined up with parts of Ocarina's Hyrule, but Nintendo only gave them 1.5 years in actual production. So unfortunately, the team simply didn't have enough time to fully implement their ideas, and the only underwater location they could include was Hyrule Castle. They also wanted to make the ocean a lot smaller, but according to Aonuma, part of the reason the sea's so vast is because if we made it smaller, there wouldn't be enough time to process the data for whatever island you were heading towards. We had to strike a good balance with the boat's speed for the same reason. In the middle of development, we wanted to make the boat go faster, but doing that meant the game couldn't read all the data, and it froze a lot. As a result, the ocean ended up bigger than they wanted, and some fans thought getting from island to island took too long, which is why they eventually added a swift sail in the HD remaster. In the final game, if you reach the edge of the ocean, the boat says you can't go any farther and forces you to U-turn. But the Zelda team originally thought of making the ocean continuous to simulate the world being round, like how the world works in Skies of Arcadia, a Dreamcast game that launched while Wind Waker was in its planning stage. That way, if If you sail off the right side of the map, you'd suddenly appear on the left side, or if you keep going up, you'll come out at the bottom. But they ended up scrapping that idea for story purposes. Wind Waker was brand new when this magazine interview took place, so the developers didn't want to reveal too much about the plot. But they did say you'll understand why they didn't make the world round when you see the game's ending. They're probably alluding to Wind Waker's final moments, when Link and Zelda sail off into the distance, looking for a land that'll become the next Hyrule. If the game's ocean was round and continuous, that would have implied the game world was in the entire world, meaning Link and Zelda would never find the land they were looking for. In other words, a cool gameplay concept was scrapped for the sake of the story. Speaking of Wind Waker's ending, a direct sequel was originally planned for GameCube, which would have seen Toon Link riding a horse around on the Great Plains. So it seems Link and Tetra would have discovered the land they were looking for, but Wind Waker's sales fell so far below expectations that Nintendo decided to make Twilight Princess instead. Ubisoft staff also tried making a Wind Waker sequel for Game Boy Advance, but the project got canned after just 1 month. And in 2007, Aonuma said he wanted to make a new Wind Waker for Wii, but knew he wouldn't be able to swing it, presumably due to the disappointing sales of the original. Toon Link did eventually get a couple more adventures on Nintendo DS, but there was actually one more game with Toon Link that did get made, but never came to the West. Tetra's Trackers was a GameCube spin-off game released in 2004. The story picks up right where Wind Waker left off, with Link now trying to prove he's got what it takes to join Tetra's crew and become a bona fide pirate. It was announced at E3 2003, and was originally planned for worldwide release as a standalone GameCube game, but during the last year of development, it got shrunk down and included with Four Swords Adventures, but only in the Japanese and Korean versions of the game. There it was called Navi Trackers, but since the English title was announced as Tetra's Trackers, that's what we're gonna call it. Tetra's Trackers was never localized into any other languages, probably because it would have been difficult with the game's full voice acting. Have a listen and you'll see what we mean. Tetra's Trackers never even got a fan translation, so we translated parts of it and added subtitles for use in this video. And it didn't just feature Tetra. A huge cast of Wind Waker characters make an appearance, and they talk constantly. Even minor characters like Sue Bell from Outset Island. The sploosh guy Salvatore has his own voice, and also does some impressions. But probably the most disconcerting voice comes from the King of Red Lions. We won't go over all the characters, but there's a lot of them, which would have made localizing Tetra's Trackers pretty tricky. And since it had already been relegated to just being a part of Four Swords, it probably wouldn't have been all that profitable. So how does the game actually work? In Four Swords Adventures, you plug up to 4 Game Boy Advances into your GameCube. Most of the gameplay takes place on the TV screen, and occasionally look down at their GBA screen if they go into a house or something. But in Tetra's Trackers, most of the gameplay takes place on the GBA, and you occasionally look up at the TV to see the map or other miscellaneous information. It's basically a treasure hunting party game. Each player, represented by a different colored Link, runs through maze-like stages searching for pirates, stamps, medals, seashells, rupees. Everything's worth a certain number of points, and whoever's got the most points after 9 minutes wins. There's also a single-player mode where you compete against Tingle. That's the short explanation. It'd probably take 15 minutes to explain it all in depth, and there's some development background as well, so we'll save that for a future video. Make sure and subscribe if you don't want to miss it. But for the purpose of today's video, besides the funny voices and visuals, we also wanted to point out that Tetra's Trackers fits into the Zelda timeline right here. It's Link's initiation into Tetra's gang of pirates, right between Wind Waker and Phantom Hourglass. But whether or not it's considered canon is controversial among fans, especially after it got bundled with Four Swords Adventures, which stars another Link who lives in a different timeline. Four Swords definitely is canon, but since there's 2 Links on one disc, and Tetra's Trackers only released in Japanese, some fans refuse to acknowledge it. But even the developers don't think too much about the timeline and what is or isn't canon, so trying to find a definitive answer is probably overthinking it. Either way, it's certainly an interesting chapter in the life and times of Toon Link. Okay, let's get back to those magazines we translated. The whole staff talks about how glad they were to finally finish Wind Waker and how much crunch was required to get the game out on time. Looking back right after launch, they said, "It was painful when we were making it. We really couldn't go home or see our kids. When everyone came into work in the morning, I'd move from where I slept on the 3rd floor to my workstation on the 5th floor, and then go back to the 3rd floor at night. I had no idea what was happening in the outside world." Aonuma wasn't even aware winter had arrived, adding, "I saw some guys in the office wearing down jackets and thought, what's up with these guys? When I eventually got to go home, I was surprised to see how cold it had gotten." Even with all that crunch, Wind Waker's short 1.5-year development meant they just didn't have enough time to include everything they would have liked. Aonuma says the very last thing they were working on when the clock struck midnight was the crabs. In the final game, they're tiny and don't really do anything except run away and dig into the sand. But the Zelda team wanted to make them 10 times their normal size and much more interactive. Nintendo Dream Magazine makes a point of Aonuma's regretful tone as he tells them, "We were going to have crabs on the shore and do lots of things with them, but in the end we couldn't make it happen. We were thinking about what to do with the crabs when development ended. Sorry about the crabs." He also laments how the boat turned out. In the final game, if you're on the boat, equipping the bombs makes a cannon appear, and the grapple hook turns into a crane for dredging up treasure. But Aonuma says they wanted to add a lot more tools for the boat, but didn't have enough time. They probably could have implemented at least one more, if it wasn't for one guy on the Zelda team who vastly overestimated the American education system. Aonuma said, "I've never sailed a ship before, and I thought sailboats couldn't move against the direction of the wind. But someone who's actually been on a yacht told me, if a boat zigzags, it can still sail against the wind," which was the first I'd ever heard of that. I was told, "This is something everyone in America learns in high school, and if you don't get it right, there are definitely going to be complaints." So I thought we couldn't cut corners there. The extra time spent on the zigzagging boat meant less time was left for other items. Previous Zelda games always had a nice variety of mini-games, like the shooting gallery and bomb-chew bowling. The team wanted to add some into Wind Waker too, like an island where Link can play golf. Unfortunately though, time was so tight that Aonuma had to give the order to abandon the idea. But as they were nearing the deadline, they came into the office one morning and were shocked to see the golf island somehow appeared out of nowhere. Aonuma said someone must have snuck in after hours and built it themselves, without anyone else on the team knowing. Sadly though, a lot of other mini-games weren't so lucky, and along with 2 entire dungeons, ultimately got left out of the final game. One thing that did make it in was the Sploosh game on Windfall Island, which was demanded by Nintendo's old-timers, which kinda makes sense since it's based on Battleship, an old board game that boomers played when they were kids. Aonuma even had to ban the strategy guide team from playing it because he was afraid they'd get obsessed and never get around to playing the rest of the game. In the original Japanese version, Salvatore's game is literally about sinking battleships. But when Wind Waker was localized for an international audience, they changed it into a squid game. And when the HD remaster released a decade later, they used the squid version in every region, including Japan. But these aren't the only secrets we dug up on Wind Waker. According to Aonuma and Haruhana, the Deku Leaf was originally a paper fan. Its only purpose was fanning things, but later in development they came up with the idea for Link to use it to fly around in the wind, so they changed it into a leaf. If you ever wondered how deep underwater old Hyrule was, Aonuma provides an answer in one of these magazines. He says, "We limited the sense of how deep it is because of the crane. It's fairly easy to go to Hyrule as well. It's deep enough to fully hide a person, and then a little deeper still." He might be referring to its canonical depth and not its actual depth though, because in his Boundary Break episode, YouTuber She Says moved the camera to get a visual of the depth, which made it look to be around 40 feet. The only part of Hyrule you actually get to visit is the castle, which is definitely deeper than both those estimates, but that's probably because it's at the bottom of a chasm. Another interesting fact is that every item in Wind Waker had its name translated in Wind Waker's English release, except for one, the Hioi pear. As pointed out by Aonuma in one of these magazines, the fruit gets its name from Hioi, the Japanese word for possession, as in being possessed like how a spirit takes control of a person's body. So if they translated the Hioi pair, it would have been the possession pair, which apparently they didn't think the Western audience could handle. Well, probably the Western audience's parents, if you know what I mean. One of the younger devs, Toshiaki Suzuki, was selected as Wind Waker's, quote, Tingle specialist. Working on Tingle and his fairy buddies was his entire job for quite some time. One of his coworkers said, "From dusk till dawn, he thought about nothing but Tingle. It drove him crazy." In all these magazines, Toshiaki's only given one brief opportunity to speak, which he uses to say, "I've been thinking about nothing but Tingle for these last few months, so please, experience adventuring together with Tingle. The rare blue Tingle is on Outset Island, ... What he's talking about is the rarest character in the whole game, and most people who've played Wind Waker never even knew he existed. Knuckle is Tingle's little brother. He carved the entirety of Tingle Tower by himself when he was just 10 years old. Then Tingle came along and put up a sign that said "For Tingle Only," which made Knuckle so mad that he ran away to Outlet Island. The only way you can ever see Knuckle in the GameCube version is by plugging in a Game Boy Advance and going to Outset, which triggers an argument between the two fairy brothers. Then you play a mini-game to unlock the hand-me-down Tingle Tuner, an item only found in the GameCube version that lets you buy arrows, bombs, and bait anytime you want through the GBA. Finding Knuckle is such a hassle that the game actually considers your figurine collection complete if you manage to get all of them except Knuckle. Speaking of Knuckle's figurine, its description features an interesting secret. It says his studio is inside the head of Tingle Tower. It's impossible to get inside the tower's head through any normal means, but it is possible if you hack the game, and by the looks of it, it seems the Tingle specialist really did go crazy. Just look at this place. Since the HD remaster couldn't hook up with a Game Boy Advance, most of Knuckles' content got cut. The argument, the minigame, and even the hand-me-down Tingle Tuner he gives you. But he will appear on Tingle Island after you get the 5 Tingle statues, and Knuckles' figure now is required to complete the full collection. It's been updated to say, supposedly it used to bother him that this collection was considered complete, even without his figurine. And if you're worried about that Tingle specialist who went crazy, don't worry. Things worked out pretty well for him. He immediately got promoted to director and made Four Swords Adventures, and nowadays he's producer on the Mario Party series.
Did you know? Kingdom Hearts owes its existence to a string of chance events. The first of these events was when Final Fantasy developer Tetsuya Nomura overheard a conversation between Square Enix executive Shinji Hashimoto and Final Fantasy creator Hironobu Sakaguchi. Nomura heard them saying something along the lines of, "Mickey Mouse would have been great, but we can't use him," and stated that he was interested in working on whatever this mystery project was. In an interview with Nintendo CEO Satoru Iwata, Nomura explained why he was interested in the project, saying that while he was working on Final Fantasy VII, Super Mario 64 was released for the Nintendo 64. Super Mario 64's fully three-dimensional environments and the freedom you had to explore these environments had a huge impact on him. When Nomura told his colleagues that he wanted to make a game like Super Mario 64, they said, "But Mario's already a world-famous character. It would be impossible to start from scratch with an all-new character." But Nomura felt that Disney had some of the few characters that could rival Mario in popularity, and jumped at the chance to realize his ideas when he overheard Hashimoto and Sakaguchi talking. They later both agreed to give Nomura a chance to direct the project. The second chance event was when Hashimoto unwittingly stepped into an elevator with a Disney executive. At the time, Disney and Square both worked in the same building, so the elevator ride gave Hashimoto the chance to pitch the idea of a collaboration directly to Disney. They quickly came up with the idea of a crossover as a vague production concept, and Hironobu Sakaguchi later agreed to using Final Fantasy and Disney characters together. At the start of development, Disney wanted Donald Duck to be the game's protagonist, while Square wanted Mickey Mouse. Nomura felt that neither would work well, and wanted to develop an original character based on Disney's iconic style. So in the end, Sora was created. Sora was originally going to wield a chainsaw sword instead of a keyblade, and his design was going to resemble that of a lion. Sora's final design, however, had yellow shoes, red shorts, and white gloves, all inspired by Mickey Mouse. The game's story was also originally going to be a much simpler Disney-styled story, but it was altered to appeal more to Final Final Fantasy fans. 2 months before Kingdom Hearts released, Square held a promotional contest for the game exclusively in the US. The winner of the contest would have their name used in the game. The lucky winner was New Yorker Kurt Zisa, and his name would be used for the game's six-armed hidden boss of the same name. Final Fantasy X's Riku was originally going to play a major role in the first Kingdom Hearts game. She was going to be a part of Leon's group in Traverse Town and help Sora throughout the game. She was removed because her name was too similar to the character Riku, and she was ultimately replaced with Yuffie. She did, however, later appear with the rest of the Gullwings in Kingdom Hearts 2. In an interview with Tetsuya Nomura, he revealed that Cloud's appearance in Kingdom Hearts was inspired by Final Fantasy VII's Vincent Valentine, saying, "This time, in this setting, Cloud is leaning towards the dark side, and I wanted to make him a bit more demon-like. And, since Vincent was exactly that kind of design, I just added it in. Although, I would have liked to put Vincent in the game too." The Kingdom Hearts series also has an abundance of unused levels. Disney Castle was planned to be playable in the first Kingdom Hearts game, for example. The area was shown in early trailers for the game, but the level was cut from the final version. That said, the castle can still be accessed using cheat codes. The Lion King's Pride Lands were also planned to be a playable level, with Sora turning into a lion to fight. This idea was scrapped as fighting and walking with a four-legged body required additional programming, and the team didn't have enough time to implement the idea. However, the idea was later used in Kingdom Hearts 2. The Tarzan level Deep Jungle, which appeared in the first Kingdom Hearts, didn't appear in Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories and its remake. The reason for its absence was that Disney and Square couldn't get the rights to use the Tarzan concept or characters from their copyright holders, the estate of Edgar Rice Burroughs. A world based on the Jungle Book can also be found in the code for Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep. The world can still be played through cheat codes, though it's unfinished. It's not known why this level was scrapped, though. The enemy Assault Rider was meant to appear in the first Kingdom Hearts game, but it didn't seem to fit in with any of the game's worlds, so it was removed and later used in Kingdom Hearts 2 instead. The reoccurring Final Fantasy summon Bahamut was planned to be a usable summon in Kingdom Hearts. It would have been used by Sora, but it was removed from the final version of the game. Searching through the game's data reveals a Bahamut summon option does exist. When the option is hacked back in the game and selected, however, the game will simply crash. Toy Story's Woody and Buzz Lightyear were set to appear as summons in Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix, but were removed for unknown reasons. The untextured models can still be found in the game's code, amongst the game's other summons. Pleakley from the film Lilo and Stitch was originally going to be present in the Deep Space level in Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep. He was removed for unknown reasons, but a character model can still be found within the game's code. Originally, the Kingdom Hearts 2 final boss Xemnas was going to utilize two other gigantic forms, although it's not known why these forms were removed. Of course, it's evident to see that there are many pieces of cut content and lost information within the Kingdom Hearts series, but the biggest loss by far was the loss of all original data and assets for the first Kingdom Hearts game. This is the reason Kingdom Hearts HD 1.5 Remix is reported to have been made from the ground up. One last interesting piece on Kingdom Hearts is that the actress Catherine Beaumont, who voiced Alice in Disney's Alice in Wonderland at the age of 13, reprised her role as Alice in Kingdom Hearts over 50 years later at the age of 64.
Of course! I've done absolutely nothing wrong.
Did you know? One of the earliest inspirations for Okami was Capcom's remake of Resident Evil. Released in 2002 and originally developed for the Nintendo GameCube, Resident Evil utilized the new console's graphical capabilities and stunned critics with its atmospheric visuals. As Hideki Kamiya, Okami's director, recalled, "The Resident Evil team was the first team I worked with after I joined Capcom. When it was remade for the GameCube, I was very impressed by how far the visuals had come in their ability to depict realistic situations. I thought if we had enough institutional knowledge at Capcom to make a realistic horror game like Resident Evil, then I also wanted to try using this technology to make a world that was glistening and beautiful." That feeling was at the root of Okami. Kamiya explained that living and working in an urban environment had awakened a sense of hometown nostalgia in him, and he longed for the peaceful Japanese countryside. In order to satisfy his yearning for a rural setting, he made nature a focal point for his new project. Kamiya originally wanted Okami to have a realistic art style. In fact, completing the game unlocks a short clip that shows players the original artistic direction of the project. However, the concept had to be scrapped as the team couldn't achieve the level of detail detail they wanted to with the PlayStation 2's hardware limitations. According to Okami's producer Atsushi Inaba, an art designer showed the development team a style inspired by sumie, or Japanese black ink paintings. The team loved the concept and decided to base the game's aesthetics on that. While developing the game in this new art style, Inaba wanted players to get involved with the artwork, rather than passively observing it. This led to the implementation of the celestial brush mechanic. As Amaterasu doesn't have a place to store an actual brush, the team decided to use her tail to draw instead. The developers wanted players to have fun with the celestial brush in the game's world, rather than run straight through the story. As a result, using the brush techniques on the game's environments can have some humorous effects. For example, power slashing the scroll in Susano's house will reveal a hidden picture of Kushi, and using whirlwind near characters and animals can cause them to get caught in the cyclone. The realistic art style wasn't the only thing that didn't make it into the final game. Early concept art showed Amaterasu transforming into a dolphin while swimming, and into a falcon while leaping from high edges. The 8 canine warrior characters were originally planned to be human. Due to difficulties designing their human forms, Okami's lead character designer, Kenichiro Yoshimura, put the 8 canine warriors aside to focus on other things. By the time Yoshimura returned to work on their designs, the scenario writers had already included the warriors in the game as actual dogs. Though shocked, Yoshimura went along with the idea. The character Isun, meanwhile, wasn't even planned to be in the game. According to Kamiya, the team knew Amaterasu needed a guide to compensate for her lack of dialogue. They eventually settled on someone tiny, no bigger than a flea, foul-mouthed and lecherous, which became the basis for Isun. Inspiration from many of the game's characters and plot points draw heavily from Shinto mythology and Japanese folklore. Isun is based on the Japanese folktale of Isun Boshi, in which an elderly couple wish for a child. Their wish is granted, but the child only grows to be 1 inch tall. The child then leaves his family to find his place in the world, and is given a needle for a sword, which resembles the weapon Isun uses in Okami. In the folktale, Isun defeats an Oni and acquires Ushide's mallet, a magic hammer which he uses to grow to normal size. This mallet appears in Okami as the lucky mallet item. However, the mallet is used to shrink Amaterasu to Isun's size, rather than grow Isun. The characters Amaterasu and Susanoo are based on the Shinto deity siblings of the same names, and the first arc of the game closely follows the Shinto legend of Yamato no Orochi's demise. In the legend, Susanoo meets a grieving elderly couple who reveal that the 8-headed serpent, Yamato no Orochi, has been devouring one of their daughters every year for the past 7 years. Their only remaining daughter is Kushinada Hime, but Orochi is coming for her as well. Susanoo promises to kill the beast, in return for Kushi's hand in marriage, and transforms her into a comb that he places in his hair. The game's Kushi's hair is distinctly comb-shaped. Susanoo and the couple then brew 8 separate servings of sake for the 8 heads of Orochi. When Orochi arrives, all 8 heads intoxicate themselves, and the monster falls unconscious. As the game's boss fight against Orochi shows, Susanoo then chops the monster to bits, slaying it once and for all. Capcom localization producer David Crislip explained that the game was firmly based in Japanese culture. This meant that Capcom could have gone in 2 very different directions with the Western localization of the characters' names. They could have either completely westernized them, or they could have risked alienating the Western audience by keeping the names 100% Japanese. The team instead tried to compensate by shortening some character names. For example, the sake brewer Kushinada was shortened to Kushi, and the Kamiki village boy Mushikai was shortened to Mushi. The localization process was sped up due to the game's lack of proper voice acting. As Crislip explained in an interview with 1UP, it actually is real people talking and then scrambled. If they needed a certain emotion, they'd say, "Speak as if you were angry," and then they'd scramble it and play it backwards or something. Sighing and coughing is quite clearly someone really sighing or coughing. Then they just digitize it. Crislip felt the mumbling aspect fit the fantasy setting of the game and left that as is. Capcom referenced several of their previous games within Okami. When making your cherry cakes at night, Mrs. Orange will perform the raging demon attack used by Akuma in the Street Fighter series. When the player talks to Tama the pyrotechnist in Shinshu Field, he will unveil his new firework, the Midnight Wonder Boy, alluding to Beautiful Joe's Midnight Thunder Boy. In the same Shinshu Field, the player can purchase a technique from Onigiri Sensei's dojo. Upon doing so, Onigiri will act out a transformation sequence similar to that of Joe's. Another, more direct reference can be found in the Fashion Girls side quest in Seon City. After completing a few designs for her, the fashion girl will ask for a henshin design. Drawing a V on Mr. Cheek's kimono and fulfilling the fashion girl's request will trigger her to recite Joe's catchphrase, saying, "Look doggy, isn't it beautiful? This is my latest design, the henshin pattern. Henshin a go-go, baby." Another one of Joe's quotes appears just before Amaterasu's second fight with Waka, when he says, "Just go for it." In Amaterasu's first fight with Waka, he'll say, "Let's rock, baby," instead, a reference to Dante from Devil May Cry. In 2007, a full year after Okami's initial PlayStation 2 release, the American development team Ready at Dawn began porting the game to the Wii. Didier Malenfant, Ready at Dawn's president at the time, claimed that the Wii version would be an exact port of the original game. The process proved to be rather difficult, however, as Capcom dissolved Okami's original development studio a mere 2 months after the initial PlayStation 2 release, and much of the work of the original game was missing as a result. Although many assets were provided by Capcom, portions of the game had to be recreated from scratch by Ready at Dawn. Despite claims that no content would be cut during the port, the original Clover Studios credits were missing from the Wii version. Kamiya stated, "I find it extremely regrettable that the moe that went into the staff role is gone from the game as well. Of course, these weren't just my moe. They were the moe of everyone who worked on the project, put together in a moment of bliss, held out just for those who completed the journey. It was a special staff role for a special moment, and now it's gone. All of it. It's incredibly disappointing and sad." Controversy also arose over the Wii port's North American box art. On the new cover, the watermark for the gaming publication IGN could be seen near Amaterasu's mouth. This seemed to indicate that, rather than taking source material from their own archives, Capcom took the image from IGN's website while making the game's box art. To make up for their mistake, Capcom created an art redemption program. For a limited time, those who had a copy of the Wii version could fill out an application to be sent one of 3 high-resolution replacement covers for free. Development and shipment of the covers took so long that Capcom eventually mailed all 3 of the covers to everyone who had applied to compensate for the delay. The program has since been shut down. Capcom would later hire Japanese studio Hexadrive to remaster Okami on the PlayStation 3. The port was technically very impressive and even renders the game at a 4K resolution. The game is downsampled from 4K to 1080p in real time, resulting in a very smooth and clear image.
Did you know? Pokemon Diamond and Pearl were planned to be the ultimate Pokemon games. To unite Game Freak behind this concept, director Junichi Masuda made a summary outlining the philosophy and attitude he wanted for the new games. In an excerpt published on his blog, Masuda describes the game's world as the world of tomorrow, the world of the distant future, an ideal world, also an ultimate world. Masuda summarized his hopes for the game with 2 symbols, a diamond as a symbol of love, and a pearl as a symbol of happiness. Masuda wanted people from all over the world to come together, and made this a reality with the Global Trade Station. For the first time in the series' history, players were able to trade Pokemon online. Pokemon Diamond and Pearl had many firsts for the series, such as 3D technology. Deciding how to implement 3D visuals took Game Freak a long time, as they wanted to ensure this new approach worked with Pokemon's art style. While the team tried to create the best-looking visuals they could using the hardware, they were also concerned about accessibility. They wanted players to understand the game easily. Like in previous Pokemon games, the overworld was based on tiles so that players can easily navigate the world. Diamond and Pearl were also the first games in the main Pokemon series to use touchscreen inputs. The lower screen's interface was carefully considered and designed to be used without a stylus. The first time Masuda saw Shigeru Miyamoto using a stylus on a prototype DS, he was struck by how unnecessary it seemed. He reasoned that people should only need a stylus in 2 scenarios, when the screen is too small or when the user needs to manipulate small objects. He felt that touching the screen directly was a lot more intuitive, and that it didn't make sense to call it a touch screen otherwise. When he suggested the game be played using the player's finger, Masuda was met with resistance. Game Freak staff feared the screen would become smudged and dirty. Masuda argued that children were unlikely to care how dirty their console was, and that the obsession with cleanliness was a Japanese mindset. He even took pictures of people playing the DS using their fingers. Little by little, Game Freak came around to his way of thinking. Graphically, Takao Uno was unsure about using his thumb to touch the DS's screen at first, but over time, changes to the UI reduced those fears. The options on the lower screen were all color-coded and made extremely large so the player could make selections without taking their eyes off the top screen. The big bold buttons also made it easier for young children to play the games, as they may not have learned to read yet. The fight command was made especially large, with the Pokemon's 4 moves hidden behind it. The commands were laid out this way so that players would need to move their finger as little as possible when choosing their attack. Another priority for designers was to help attract new people to Pokemon. Nintendo's strategy with the DS was to broaden the console's appeal to include casual gamers. President and CEO of the Pokemon Company, Tsunekazu Ishihara, welcomed the approach. He felt that it was a perfect fit for Pokemon, a series designed with younger children in mind. The UI on the lower screen was designed to draw attention and pique the curiosity of people nearby. Masuda imagined the ease of use could draw people closer together. A grandfather may lean over his grandchild's shoulder to touch the screen, and while the child may be annoyed at first, it may create conversation between the two. The Sinnoh region where Diamond and Pearl takes place is based on Hokkaido, the northernmost island of Japan. Snowy areas were added to make the setting feel more northern than previous generations. The day and night cycle returned from Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal to take advantage of hardware improvements on the DS. The DS has an internal clock and was able to display hundreds of times more colors than the Game Boy Advance, making a night and day cycle a natural fit. One mechanic which Game Freak reconsidered was the physical and special stat split. In the first 3 generations of Pokemon, all attacks of a certain type were either physical or special. For example, all fighting-type moves were physical, while all water-type moves were special. This meant that Pokemon like Gyarados, a water-type with a high physical attack, was unable to reach its full potential. Diamond and Pearl instead split moves into physical or special categories based on their context. Game Freak's efforts paid off, as the release of Diamond and Pearl saw a surge in popularity of competitive Pokemon. In 2009, the Pokemon Company even began hosting the Video Game Championships, a competition that saw champions from a number of local regional events come together to battle. While the games were announced for a 2005 release, Diamond and Pearl were pushed back to a December 2006 launch in Japan. Despite this, the games shipped with a number of bugs, most notably a glitch where the player could surf on certain tiles and clip through the wall and out of bounds. Crafty players discovered that by moving a certain number of steps while out of bounds and then saving and reloading the game, they could spawn on the overworld in places they weren't supposed to. This allowed them to catch certain mythical Pokemon like Darkrai and Shaman, who were supposed to be locked behind a special Nintendo event. These bugs were removed in the international versions of the games. While all of these areas would be made accessible through Nintendo events, the Hall of Origin, where the player could catch Arceus, was not. The Azure Flute, which was needed to access the area, was never distributed. In an interview with Nintendo World Report, Masuda revealed that after the game was complete, he decided the Azure Flute was too confusing for people and kind of hard to understand, and so he chose not to distribute it. Whether he was referring to the flute's mechanics or its in-game context is unclear. Pokemon Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum also received some censorship across the world. The Game Corner was made inaccessible in European and Korean versions of Pokemon Platinum to comply with the new PEGI regulations regarding gambling. And one story in the game titled Sinnoh Folk Story 3 was altered in all regions in English. The book, found in Canalave Library, alludes to the idea that people used to marry Pokemon because the two were so similar. In the Western version, this was altered slightly. Instead of marrying, people and Pokemon were instead very close and ate together at the same table. Pokemon Diamond and Pearl's localization also contained scattered references toward internet humor and leet speak, with many characters using words like owned and noob. Translator Nobu Ogasawara was a member of the Something Awful forums and referenced online culture in the games. One of Nobu's inclusions can be seen with a painter on Route 208, who names their painting My Pokemon is Fight. This is a reference to My Tank is Fight, a humorous book on Second World War inventions written by Something Awful user Zach Parsons. Diamond and Pearl were already designed to be the ultimate Pokemon games, but Game Freak knew that Platinum had to be stronger. It was decided that Giratina should embody antimatter, as it was a counterpart to the time and space embodied by Dialga and Palkia. Masuda explained to game designer Takeshi Kawachimaru that there was an antimatter world, a paradox of time and space that exists in relation to Dialga and Palkia. He tried to convey his idea by explaining complicated physics concepts and using the image of an upside-down Mount Fuji reflected off a lake's surface. While Kawachimaru didn't understand the concept at first, he felt that he was eventually able to capture the idea's essence in the distortion world. Sinnoh's new Pokemon were designed to surprise players. Art director Ken Sugimori was conscious that not every new Pokemon idea was necessarily good. He wanted players to believe that all new creatures were different to the older ones, but that they were all still Pokemon. They were designed to look a little awkward to players at first. Uno drew from his personal experiences, using his everyday life as inspiration. He started his design process by looking at the Sinnoh region and deciding what kind of Pokémon would live there. The strongest Pokémon were designed first, and many Pokémon ideas were suggested by the team to create and maintain a strategic balance. Evolutions were given to Pokémon that looked like they ought to evolve, and also to Pokémon that would make the game more fun if they evolved. For example, Honchkrow is an extension of Murkrow. Honchkrow's broom-like tail and beard-like feathers also invokes witch and wizard imagery as well as crows and ravens. However, some of its appearance and name is reminiscent of a crime boss. In particular, Honchkrow's English name uses the word honcho, which is derived from the Japanese term for squad leader, or boss. In Japan, this reference is flipped, with the Pokémon's name being Don Karasu. This is a combination of Don, the leader of a mafia syndicate, and Karasu, the Japanese word for crow. Completely new Pokémon such as Luxray may take inspiration from the tiger, as well as the lynx or lion. It may even be based on the constellations of Lynx or Leo, due to Shinx and Luxio having star shapes on their tails. Luxray could draw more inspiration from the lynx, however. In some European folklore, the lynx could allegedly see through opaque objects. Luxray also has this ability, which can be compared to X-ray vision, linking in with Luxray's etymology. Luxray's Japanese name, Rentorar, is likely a combination of Rontogen, a unit of exposure to ionizing radiation named after its discoverer, as well as Tora, the Japanese word for tiger, as well as a roar sound. Burmy, Wormadam, and Mothim are all based on the bagworm family of moths. Burmy is based on the moth's earlier pupa stage of development, whereas Wormadam and Mothim are based on developed female and male bagworms respectively. Their unique setup of males and females evolving into different Pokémon was based on the fact that only male bagworms fully mature. The female bagworms are often underdeveloped in their final stages, which often have vestigial wings, legs, and mouths.
Did you know? Little Big Planet began as a game called Craft World. Little Big Planet's developer, Media Molecule, was founded by ex-Lionhead Studios employees, and Craft World was their first project together. Craft World was similar to Little Big Planet in that it was a side-scrolling platformer with physics-based puzzles, though its art style was very different from the game it would become. The title's controls were partly inspired by a game the team made back at Lionhead called Ragdoll Kung Fu. Craft World was unique, however, in that the player only used analog sticks to move. The left stick controlled the main character's feet, and the right stick controlled their hands in order to do things like jump, grab, push, pull, and swim. From the very beginning, the option for players to create and share levels was the core of Craft World. When the time came to pitch Craft World to a publisher, however, Media Molecule downplayed the creation aspect, as they were unsure if it was a good fit for a console game. Contrary to these concerns, the idea was very well received, and Sony agreed to fund the game's development for 6 months. Sony eventually asked to publish and further fund the game in exchange for PlayStation exclusivity and the ownership of the franchise. The game's protagonist was originally a simplistic character named Mr. Yellowhead, but as full development began, Craft World underwent drastic changes. The character went through several redesigns, leading to a group of characters called Craftlings, who would eventually become Little Big Planet's Sack People. Despite being replaced, Mr. Yellowhead would live on in the form of an unlockable costume in Little Big Planet. Some pieces of concept art reveal other early costume ideas, including ones based on the Prince from Katamari and even Mario. The game was also planned to have 3-dimensional gameplay rather than simply traveling from left to right. However, this less restrictive design actually made development more difficult. The game didn't come together until the team focused their efforts on layer-based side-scrolling gameplay seen in the finished product. Little Big Planet was initially set to launch in mid-October of 2008, but the game ended up being delayed just days before its release. This was after Sony Europe received a report that one of the game's tracks, titled Tapa Nyang, contained lyrics from the Quran. After being contacted by a displeased Muslim group, Sony chose to delay the game so they could address this issue. This was a tough call to make, as the game had already been shipped to retailers at this point. Many copies of the game had to be recalled and replaced with an updated version that had the potentially offensive lyrics removed. The track was kept in the game, but it was replaced with an instrumental version of the song. Sony also released an online patch for players that managed to get an early copy of the game. Any serious backlash was avoided, but some criticized Sony for complying. Zudi Jassar, the president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, told Edge magazine that Sony's willingness to bend on the issue went against freedom of speech. As a series focused on customization with a vast array of features, the Little Big Planet games inherently come with a large amount of unused content. While the final version of the first Little Big Planet includes 8 playable themes, remnants in the game's data indicate that there were at least 4 more themes that didn't make the cut. These themes were called English Seaside, Russian Theater, American Midwest Train, and Japanese Window. Little is known about these themes as almost all of their assets were completely removed, but the ambient noise track from each theme can still be found in the game's files. In addition, parts of an English Seaside level can be seen in early gameplay trailers. The background music tracks for these 4 unused themes were later released as downloadable content in the MM Music Pack and Monster Pack. Little Big Planet also contains an unused hazard known as the Freezatron. A working version of the hazard can be seen in a pre-release build of the game. When the Freezatron is touched, Sackboy is frozen in a block of ice, which the player would have to break by shaking the controller. While the hazard did technically work in-game, it created problems during network play and was even seen to cause slowdown during single-player mode. It's possible to put the Freezatron in the player's menu via hacking, though there are no means of actually using it. Other bits of leftover content include a creature called a walker, a springboard that has functional physics but an unfinished model, a radio tower, and a dab of glue that was meant to be used as a tool for sticking objects together. There's also a plastic egg that was originally used to hold prizes before being replaced by prize bubbles. As a possible holdover from when the egg was still part of the game, collecting all the prizes in a level will cause the sound of a rooster crowing to play. Perhaps the most unusual leftover from development is a picture of actor Arnold Schwarzenegger from the movie Total Recall that was used as a placeholder preview image. Several unused costumes can be found in the game's data. One of these is a costume based on the famous motorcycle stunt performer Evel Knievel, which can be seen in early screenshots of the game. Other unused costumes include a Bumblebee, which was intended to be part of the Design a Sackboy DLC pack, and a movie director costume including a black beret and clapperboard that was likely meant to be part of a video making contest. The game also contains pieces for costumes based on the Big Daddy from BioShock, Ratchet & Clank, and Sephiroth from Final Fantasy VII. While these costumes were not used in Little Big Planet, they would be made available in the game's sequel with some slight redesigns. The Game of the Year edition of Little Big Planet also contains information relating to a Parappa the Rapper costume, though there are no actual assets for it in any version of the game. There are a number of assets and data strings from early versions of Little Big Planet 2 that are also present in the first game, which could mean that this content was planned to be part of an expansion for the original Little Big Planet. Additionally, Little Big Planet 2 contains voice clips from an early version of the story mode. The clips have different voice actors than the final version, possibly for placeholder purposes, and reveal that the story's villain was originally not going to be the Negativatron, but instead Avalon. Little Big Planet 3 has unused voice clips as well. They appear to correspond to Little Big Planet Hub, a free-to-play game that was announced in 2013 and scheduled for release later that year. Hub would have included a limited selection of playable content from Little Big Planet 1 and 2, as well as compatibility for DLC from other games in the series. The game was confirmed to still be in development as of 2014, but has not been mentioned since, and appears to be cancelled. The Seaside Surprise level kit released for Little Big Planet 3 contains content that was meant to be exclusive to Hub, suggesting that work done for Hub may have been rolled into the later Little Big Planet 3.
Did you know? Sly Cooper is said to be based on a character from Sucker Punch Studios' previous game, Rocket Robot on Wheels, which released on the Nintendo 64 in 1999. The game's antagonist was called Jojo, who, like Sly, is a hat-wearing raccoon. The character Whoopi Walrus may have also been the basis for Jim McSweeney from Sly 3, as both are large purple walruses. Sucker Punch pay homage to Rocket throughout the Sly series. During a cutscene in Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus, for instance, Murray can be seen wearing a hat based on Rocket's hub level, Whoopi World. In Sly 2, Band of Thieves, a gravestone can be found in the A Tangled Web episode that reads R.I.P. Rocket. Jojo can also be found at the end of the same level, floating above a crypt. The basic concept behind Sly Cooper was to make an action game where the main character was a thief. A thief proved to be a natural fit for an action platformer, as it allowed Sucker Punch to make the types of risky terrain and dramatic situations a robber would find themselves in. Sly was designed to fit this mold, with the raccoon's banded eyes mirroring a burglar's mask. His original design was a lot stockier, more closely resembling an actual raccoon, but then Sly became lankier over time, and his animations became more expressive as a result. Early builds of the game showed Sly standing up straight as he ran, which slowly developed into a sneakier crouch. Sly's cane was designed not as a hook, but as a question mark, giving him the air of a raccoon of mystery. It was also a hook planned to transform into different tools to aid Sly, such as a spray that could reveal hidden barriers. Sly was intended to make the player feel like a romanticized, idealized version of a thief. To reflect this, the team had a golden rule that they referenced when making decisions about the game's creative direction: whatever is thiefier wins. Checkpoints and coins originally used Sly's logo, however the team eventually decided against this, as it would feel less like the player was breaking into an enemy stronghold if there was Sly iconography littered about the stages. These coins were later changed to dancing green bills that resembled American dollars, but in the end these were dropped too. They were altered due to localization concerns. It was thought that dollars would be easily recognizable to American audiences, but less so in other parts of the world. Subsequent releases of the game also saw changes. The boss battle with Miss Ruby takes the form of a rhythm-based mini-game. However, this boss is considerably more difficult in the Sly collection, as the music is remixed and out of sync with her actions. As work began on Sly 2, Sucker Punch decided upon a one-sentence project description that would inform the game's story and level design. This sentence was, "Sly and the gang worked together to pull off a big string of heists." The game took heavy inspiration from classic heist films like Ocean's 11 and The Italian Job, and to make it feel more like Sly's gang were working as a team, all three members became playable and were each given their own role in the capers. The game's levels were designed through a collaborative back and forth between the art department and the level designers. Architecture was used to guide the player through the level, so shots were set up to focus on architecture before any gameplay was designed. This way artists would know where to place important buildings and structures. The first level the team made took 8 months to complete. While the level didn't make it into the final game, it became the conceptual building block for the rest of Sly 2 stages. Little is known about this lost scenario, but it was said to have taken place in Monaco and would have seen Bentley crashing a stolen boat into a casino. In the Sly 3 level, Bloodbath Bay, there's a poster that says Dev and Karen wedding August 5th. This is a nod to two developers at Sucker Punch, Dev Maiden and Karen Yamagiwa Maiden, who got married during the creation of the game. Sly 3 was Sucker Punch's last entry into the series. The company wanted to be focused on a single project at a time, and the transition from the PlayStation 2 to the PlayStation 3 presented the perfect opportunity to transition into a new project. However, there's still evidence to suggest that Sucker Punch were once working on a fourth title, planned for release on the PS3. The game was reportedly planned to be shown at E3 2007 and was said to feature connectivity with a PSP Sly title, which was similarly ill-fated. Concept art exists for the PSP game, drawn by prolific comic and game artist Joe Madureira. The art showed Sly in different period costumes, suggesting the game was to have explored his ancestry, just like the eventually released Thieves in Time. The art also showed a shadowy, evil-looking version of Sly. The fourth installment ultimately found itself in the hands of Sanzaru Games, who were responsible for porting all the three original games to the PS3 in the Sly collection. Keeping this new game true to the original trilogy was a top priority for the fresh developers. They wanted the game to look exactly how a fan would imagine the series would look in HD. And speaking of fans, Sony asked the fans to design some of the treasures that Sly would find throughout the title. This was done in the form of a competition, and winning entries were included in the finished game. Concept art for Thieves in Time shows that Miss Decibel and Penelope weren't in the initial roster of bosses. In their place are a lizard and an elephant that appear to have been combined into Miss Decibel, and a mole with a large drill. Concept art also exists for a level set in ancient Egypt, and although the level itself was cut, the location was reused in the game's secret ending. The game also makes several allusions to other series. The treasure Lutrella Nevadensis is Daxter from Jak and Daxter, and Medieval Metal Man is Clank from Ratchet and Clank. Collecting all of the masks in the game will unlock Cole's amp weapon from Infamous, the series that Sucker Punch went on to develop. The achievements Ancient Warfare 3 and Navigate Like Drake are references to Modern Warfare 3 and Uncharted respectively. Inspector Carmelita Fox also shares similarities to the Batman character Renee Montoya. Both are strong-willed police women with Spanish names who have a complicated opinion of the protagonist. Carmelita's middle name is even Montoya, strengthening the connection. Renee Montoya was created for the 1990s cartoon series Batman the Animated Series, which was a source of inspiration for the Sly Cooper series. Carmelita is also shown to be a fan of Neil Diamond, a nod to the singer Neil Diamond. This may even be a reference to one of Diamond's songs, Carmelita's Eyes. In another musical reference, the Guru of the Stone takes a group of rock stars as his pupils at the end of Sly 3. The rock stars in question bring him unwanted media attention and heavily resemble the Beatles. This is referencing Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, a meditation practitioner who became a guru to the Beatles.